You're listening to Revenge of the Drive-In, brought to you by Grandma Sophia's Podcast Network. This is the podcast where we cover two movies randomly selected from a list of over 1,700 and discuss if we think they make for a good double feature. This week's movies are the 1955 British science fiction classic The Quatermass Experiment, as well as the 1955 sci-fi monster cult movie phenomenon that is Ed Wood's Bride of the Monster. I'm your host, Patrick, and I'm joined this time by a special guest.
Hello, my name is Kevin Barr, and it's nice to be here.
Well, you've certainly raised the bar for all future.
I am going to hear that my entire life. That's never
I know.
Stop.
We don't usually give last names on here. That's why I felt like I had to say something. It doesn't matter.
I gotta say, Bride of the Monster, I was really happy to go online and find that the entire film was on its Wikipedia page. That's how
I just saw that right before we started recording this.
That's the
because it's on Tubi, obviously, but it's the colorized version on Tubi, which is kind of disappointing.
Oh.
And then, of all things, the Wikipedia, what is it? Just like a .web 5 file, or it's like some format that I've never come across before in my life, and it's like, on the Wikipedia page, so clearly we're dealing with public domain here.
Yep. The mark of quality. Anytime a film can be found on its Wikipedia page, you know you're in for a treat.
Elephant in the Room, of course, is Bride of the Monster. It's featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000, which is a show that, Kevin, I believe you are a big fan of.
Yeah, I've been watching that since I was 9 years old. I remember my brother was curious about what it was, so we found the movie in Blockbuster, the movie where they riffed this island Earth. We brought it home. Occasionally, if we rented movies from Blockbuster, my parents and I, they'd set up TV tables in front of the TV, and we watched a movie while we ate. And I'll always remember it because I was laughing so hard and so consistently that I could not eat because I was kept laughing. And we ended up watching it about 9 times over a 5-day rental period.
Oh, wow.
I've been a big fan ever since then. And actually revisiting Bride of the Monster, I thought about just watching it raw, but I'm like, no, I'll go back to the Mystery Science Theater episode.
Yeah, I believe this was the first time I saw it without the Mystery Science Theater, and then out of curiosity, I watched it with the Mystery Science Theater as well. I was a big Mystery Science Theater fan for a while. I believe you probably don't even know this, but I think you kind of got me into it, but because I think I had vaguely heard about it, but you were always posting about it on Facebook. Your Facebook name was Tom Servo.
Yeah,
right?
for a long time.
Am I imagining that?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. And I didn't know what that was, but then I checked it out, and kind of the summer between high school and undergrad for me is when I really got into it. And looking back, it's kind of a interest that is sort of largely lost for me. I mean, I will still enjoy a really good episode, but I don't think just throw on a random episode, I'm not going to be laughing my ass off. I've kind of grown away from that, I guess, at least. And I'm definitely a Mike guy. The Joel episodes, which is Bride of the Monster, is a Joel episode, don't quite do it for me as much. That having been said, I still have a fondness for the show.
Yeah, for me, I don't laugh out loud the same way I used to unless I really tune in and really pay attention to it. And
for me, if I throw these on, it's at the middle of the night, going to bed, and it's just on in the background.
Same. Yeah. And for me, it's because of that level of fondness. I could turn on any episode and it just feels a little bit like a warm hug. They did the revival for Netflix, and it doesn't have the same feel as it is because it's so much a higher budget. The
comic timing was just so different.
It's completely different, but also
that was the biggest thing for me.
Digging into it for me, I was thinking about why it's not working on the same level, and for me it came down to, I don't know, but maybe it's just me, but they're LA comics. They're West Coast LA comedians writing all these jokes, as opposed to a bunch of guys in Minnesota who are doing nothing else with their lives other than just watching these bad movies and writing jokes day in and day out. They really had the time to just craft this into a finely tuned machine. Whereas when you're in LA, you gotta hustle, you gotta try and become the biggest comedian the world's ever seen, But these guys, they didn't care about that. They just liked being around each other and telling jokes.
Yeah, there's some kind of simplicity in how the original show was.
Yeah.
And I agree, that you kind of have to watch the two to understand what you're talking about, but I think I do understand.
Yeah.
Someone listening to us might have no idea what we're talking about.
I've
but I agree.
never been to
The feel's
Minnesota,
different.
but I can guarantee you that that there's something about the place there that fix the sense of humor into a very particular kind of thing
Okay.
that really
Well,
appealed to me.
I'll extend Wisconsin into there, my home state, of course, because Mike Nelson, I believe, a graduate of University of Wisconsin Stout. At least he's wearing a UW Stout sweatshirt in the movie, I know. And we used to UW Stout is, or at least this was back in the day, I don't know if this is still true, but kind of notoriously is considered the worst university of the University of Wisconsin system. We used to have a saying, when in doubt, go to Stout. Or stout, the easy way out. And I think it's neat that Mike Nelson went there. I love it.
That's hilarious. Honestly, that explains a lot of Mike Nelson. But yeah, I actually,
Maybe.
Because I do go to Mystery Science Theater for that warm hug feeling, a lot of the times the Joel episodes are like a go-to for me. Not because I'm a Joel guy necessarily, but because they're almost like more low-key and just have like a sort of charm, an easy charm about them, whereas the Mike episodes are a lot more sarcastic, a lot more
yes,
fast.
I think it comes down for me even the movie choice. Like under Mike, they were doing more like 80s, 90s, like really low budget stuff. Joel was like more the 50s stuff, which I like those movies. But to me, I want to see Werewolf with all these people who have no idea how to do an American accent, like stuff like that, like the types of movies, or where they're making fun of Joe Estevez, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is stuff I really, that's probably some of my favorite stuff in the show.
I think that's actually the main difference between both of us, because I know you're a Charles Band fan, you go on Full Moon Direct, but I am like...
I don't like admitting that publicly, but yeah.
But I think I go a couple decades behind you, I'm like the Something Weird catalog and the stuff that Vinegar Syndrome puts out. Ed Wood.
Well, you
films.
enjoy Herschel Gordon Lewis films.
I do, yeah. I
tend not to. I've seen one or two that I think are kind of neat, but yeah.
I've seen almost all of the Blood series that he's done, and a couple of his.
I didn't know there was this Blood series.
A couple of his non-gore films. I think. I don't know. I've seen, at the very least, I've seen lots of clips from them, if not the entire film. But yeah, then I went on Letterboxd and saw your reviews, and I'm like, well, that's kind of harsh.
Oh yeah, you strongly disagreed with my 10,000 or 2,000 Maniacs. How many Maniacs are there?
2,000 Maniacs. 10,000 Maniacs.
2,000. I couldn't remember how many there were.
But yeah, 2,000 Maniacs, I thought it really surprised me how much I genuinely enjoyed it on a story level and entertainment level. I thought that the gore scenes were actually clever as opposed to Blood Feast and most of his other films.
I will say I enjoyed 2,000 Maniacs more than the remake. There is a remake of that.
God.
Robert Englund's in it. It's terrible. Eli Roth cameos in it for some reason. It's the rare film that would actually benefit from Eli Roth's direction. I think it's one of those rare films.
Any movie that's like a really schlocky exploitation movie that's being remade has to have an Eli Roth cameo in it. It's just...
Yeah, it seems to be written in stone somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think that the producers reach out to him. I think he just smells something happening.
He just lives on sets, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think, that makes total sense that you would be more into the later Mike episodes, because the movie choices there are definitely a lot of 80s and 90s schlock, which I enjoy too, but just in terms of feeling the history behind the movies, I like to go back to the little bit older. But that's personal taste.
I think I like the older stuff. I like old 60s and 70s stuff, but I like the kind of B movies that they couldn't do on that show. I like a 3 on a meat hook, William Girdler type exploitation movie. The stuff that's a few notches below Tobe Hooper's work. That stuff. I guess that's what Herschel Gordon Lewis is, but I just not really a fan of those movies.
Doesn't click
but
with you.
He's very much in line with those.
I completely agree that I get a big kick out of watching those movies in general. But just the whole era fascinates me, I think it's because 80s and 90s almost feels a little too recent. We watched The Room today in class. The professor for the class that I'm a TA in is actually teaching The Room as part of a curriculum on film form, try to understand how a movie is constructed. So it's kind of an interesting way to go about it, because you have a bad movie that messes with film form a lot, and that's how you learn what actual film form is supposed to be. So,
Right.
the proof is in the pudding, whether or not the kids will actually understand it by watching The Room. But watching it today, I realized, it's basically the script level and the acting, for the most part, that's the problem with that movie. If you just, froze a few frames from it here and there, outside of some dodgy green screen, it could basically look like a real movie, or at least like a real,
or the alley set.
Yeah, like a religious movie or something.
That's the baffling thing about The Room, is that it looks half decent. It was shot on film, and most movies of that quality do not have that budget. They don't look that good.
Yeah.
That's a long diversion, but hey, hopefully you're into sci-fi stuff if you're listening, 50s sci-fi stuff, because 2 50s sci-fi monster movies, one that's basically an episode of The Outer Limits, and one that, it's an Ed Wood movie. It's a genre all its own, really.
Yep. Although I will say this, I don't know which one you want to tackle first, but Bride of the Monster I actually find more dull than most of the Ed Wood movies, because it's almost feels normal compared to his other stuff.
I've only seen the two, this and Plan 9, and it's not as magical as Plan 9.
Yeah.
Definitely not. It has some weird dialogue and stuff that I appreciate, and anytime we get a Bela Lugosi close-up of him just making goofy faces, I'm laughing. But yeah, I do agree with you. But hey, let's tackle Quatermass first, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
The film that isn't a complete joke.
Well, yeah, it's pretty intense, actually. The Quatermass Xperiment.
Yes, there's no E at the beginning of that word.
You know the story behind that?
It was a British TV movie. Was it a novel as well?
Yeah, well, it was called Quatermass Xperiment with an E in front of it, but...
the title specifically, you mean? Okay.
I don't know if you know this, but yeah, after they got the X rating back from the British Board of Film Commission, they decided to capitalize on that, and they took the E off, and just called it the Experiment.
It's great.
According to Wikipedia, Exclusive Films told cinema managers to exploit the excitement of the film.
Yeah, well, it was the 7 or 13 Ghosts of its day, where it's playing around with the title and
yeah, absolutely
spelling. Those are specifically with numbers.
I would be curious to know how many movie titles up to this point were specifically misspelling things like that. But also, it's funny because you look at that and my mind wouldn't go...
Sweet Song's Badass Song?
Yeah, exactly. Rated X by an all-white jury.
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the greatest taglines in film history.
There's a t-shirt you can get there from some company I've seen on Instagram that just says Rated X by an all-white jury, and I want that shirt. So, Quatermass Xperiment begins with a rocket crash onto a farm somewhere in England.
Somewhere in the south of England, yeah.
Yeah, and
Sussex, probably, somewhere like that.
Yeah, you would know more about that than I would. I have not been across the pond myself. But honestly, I actually found it interesting for it to begin with what feels like a direct reference to World War II bombings in England, just in a 1955 film, because you start off with a bang. You start off with people wondering what all that noise is overhead, and just loud explosions and having to duck inside their homes. That's pretty gruesome for people who've just come out of the war.
Yeah, it has, not quite the same thing, but it has kind of that immediacy of the original Godzilla.
Yeah.
Where something it feels so relevant and current. And that's really what I love about 50s sci-fi. And I'm talking not the Ed Wood, but the quality sci-fi. Something like The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is probably my favorite one of those. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. There's something I've talked about this before, but there's always a real curiosity about how things work, how things, outside of this world work. But there's also, I love that there's never a hesitation to just take it and make it into the most terrifying thing you can imagine. And in this case, that's, there's a little bit of calling upon some modern British history, I guess.
Yeah, basically, all the bombings that took place in England in the 40s, I can't imagine a movie like this coming out in America 10 years after 9/11 and beginning with something that might be oh my god, did a plane just crash into a giant skyscraper somewhere? It feels like an equivalent.
Yeah, if Independence Day came out after 9/11, what would that look like?
Exactly. I guess I started I started to stop myself because I realized, oh wait, all blockbusters nowadays are just constantly destroying entire cities.
At a certain point, but there was a grace period where we couldn't do anything, and then in the same year we had two like terrorist kidnap the president movies, and it's like, so that was the year I guess we figured out when White House Down and Olympus Has Fallen came out. That was when we decided it was okay to invoke 9/11 in our action movies, I guess.
Pretty much as soon as Zero Dark 30 came out, it was like all bets were off. Like, okay, we've come to terms with 9/11. Let's make Man of Steel now.
Oh God. Yes, I was going to say Man of Steel is one of the movies that most reminds me of it, and it not really the proper avenue.
Not what you go to Superman for. So anyways, it opens with a rocket crashing in somewhere in the south of England, and a lot of people arrive right away, a lot of firefighters and everyone, because the rocket's super hot. But the main person who comes in is Brian Donlevy, one of the only non-British people in the cast here. He's I think him and the woman who plays Victor Carroon's wife.
Oh yeah, he's from Cleveland, Ohio. I just see that name and assume he's British, you know?
It does sound like a British name, but then he talks, just the way he talks and the way he looks, it just seems like an all-American kind of guy. Really great in one of his last roles, the lead in Pit Stop, the Jack Hill film from '69.
Oh, he was director of Spider Baby and the Big Birdcage, which have both been featured on this podcast.
Yeah, did Coffee and Foxy Brown back to back. Like,
that's
right. What a guy! I met Jack Hill one day, and he was confused as to why I asked for a picture with him. But
he told me
he's a hero.
He's like, how do you know who I am? Probably, right?
So the rocket lands on the field, and it turns out Quatermass, the name of Brian Donlevy's professor, has shot a rocket into space and has now come back down onto the field with no one knowing about it. So English officials are quite upset with him, because he launched a rocket into space without permission. And they're eventually able to get the rocket open when they find out one person is still inside, and that person is Victor Carroon, I believe. And he is in shock. It looks to be in very bad shape. His skin has kind of the leathery consistency of Iggy Pop.
Oh, God, that's so spot on, yeah.
Yeah, and he only gets 2 words in before he ends up being just completely silent the rest of the movie, where he just says, "Help me," very softly.
Right.
And Quatermass doesn't seem to care very much. He goes into the rocket, wants to know where the other 2 astronauts that went up there are, but all he finds are just spacesuits that are locked and fully in there, fully intact, but are completely empty.
This movie's basically, it's like a backdoor mad scientist movie.
Yeah.
It doesn't appear like it would be, but then eventually we get more on Quatermass, and he's not tremendously developed. There isn't that much to his character, but he is just this dude who just does not care about anything regulations wise, and he'll just do whatever. And I think he's a compelling character. It's a good performance from Donlevy. It's good. He's compelling.
Yeah, it didn't even, it's been about 3 to 4 years since I've seen this movie, and it did not even register with me just how unlikable he is in the first half.
Yeah, I was the same way. Yeah,
and the second half, we'll get into that in a bit, but the second half, it just moves so quickly you don't get the chance to notice until the final moments arrive, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. But basically, that's when I realized, oh, that's the point. You're right. It is a backdoor mad scientist movie.
Also, I want to focus on the title for a bit here. First of all, I'm sure you are aware, this had a different title released in the United States. It was The Creeping Unknown, which is a far more generic title.
Yeah.
But it's a title I can imagine it's easier to sell the movie on, because Quatermass Xperiment, using a proper name of a character in a title, you kind of need to already know who that character is. Why did
Pretty
John
much.
Carter flop,
Yeah.
Because John Carter is a thing. It pre-exists, but no one knows what the hell it is.
Yeah.
And it's
also,
Quatermass,
it's a weird name. It's not a name everyone knows.
That's a good point too. Yeah, it's sort of Alan Quatermain kind of. It reminds you of that, which is British, but yeah, I mean it's a weird title, I guess. But because this was a British TV movie, maybe the name was widely known.
Yeah.
But it's just like a weird, like when you're watching the movie, you don't really like realize at first, like you were saying, like how big a part of the movie he is. But then it's like he's in the title, like he's a huge part of the movie.
Yeah, he's definitely a huge part of the movie. It's more like he's so unlikable that when I watched it again, I started to think, is this a flaw? Like, is it a bad thing that he's this unlikable? And then I realized, and then cooler heads prevailed, and I was like, oh, he's supposed to be this way. Because after he checks the rocket and can't find the other two men, the immediate thing they have to do is find Victor Carroon some medical help. So Quatermass brings him to Dr. Briscoe's laboratory, and the reason why he's going there is because Quatermass is completely convinced that, hospitals and doctors won't have any idea how to treat someone who's gone through all of the strange, whatever happened in outer space events that Carroon just went through. But unfortunately, even under the good doctor's care, Victor doesn't speak, and he seems to just be very nervous. His eyes always seem to be like constantly alert. And there seem like I mentioned his skin before, but there are some moments that just his skin seems to take on some kind of disfiguration, but they don't exactly know what it is. I believe that there's also people talk about how he's like cold to the touch.
Yeah, there's talk about that.
Yeah, and I think meanwhile you have Scotland Yard coming in and being all nosy because they think that, oh well, the three guys in a spaceship, two of them are missing now, so must have been Carroon's fault. So they get Carroon's fingerprints, and turns out they are not the fingerprints of a human.
Right. That's so great. That's so creepy.
Yeah, that's like just a really effective way of communicating that something is not human about this guy anymore, because he's not even in the room. You just look at his fingerprints a day after they've been taken, and you're like, oh, something's weird here. Something's not right.
Yeah, so I mentioned the Outer Limits earlier because there is an episode that's remarkable similarities to this. I don't remember if he goes into space or not, but it's a Robert Culp episode. Robert Culp, my favorite Columbo recurring villain. He's awesome. And he like slowly becomes, we don't want to give too much away with this movie because it's basically the same thing. But there's also a Twilight Zone episode, where a bunch of people come back from space and they just like slowly start disappearing. And the more every one of them disappears, like no one other than the guys involved remember that guy, and it's hard to explain. I'm not doing it justice, but I love like the slow burns of these kinds of stories where like we know something's wrong, but we honestly have no idea what. Something happened in space, but we just kind of, there's like an investigative angle, but then we also see it. I mean, but it affects him as like a human too. I don't know, it's just really, it's effective storytelling, I think. I don't know how else to describe it.
So going back to Quatermass Experiment, Scotland Yard is after Carroon, but Quatermass is saying, no, we need to study him, we need to know and what he's gone through and what he's been. Meanwhile, before we get further into Carroon, Quatermass goes back to the rocket and finds some kind of material that appears to be a jelly-like substance. So he brings it over to Briscoe, and Briscoe confirms that, well, it is jelly. It's something that is either like it's some kind of living organism, or was a living organism that's just been reduced.
They compared it to plant life, I think, right?
Yeah, well, I think they said like they don't know if it's, human, animal, or plant. Okay. I think that was the problem, is that they know that it once was, or it might still be like, a living organism, but it's not going anywhere. It's just jelly now. Considering the fact that they can't find the astronauts, and they find this sort of gellular aftermath on the spaceship, people start to assume the worst. Meanwhile, let's get to probably my number one problem with the movie, and that is Carroon's wife, Judy.
Yeah.
I don't want to put all the blame of this on the performer.
No, it's mostly the writing.
Yeah, she is pretty much like the only woman in this entire movie.
Well, yeah, there's that.
Yeah, like maybe a couple smaller things. I think the police inspector has a wife who's cooking dinner for him at one point. Also, I'll get into that in a little bit, actually. I'll because I just remembered who it was. Okay. So when we're describing the plot, I'll get into that.
I know exactly who you're thinking of, yeah. She's very young.
Yes, exactly. So Judith is Victor Carroon's wife, and she is a very strange characterization, because at first she's just so happy to have Victor home and is so worried for him.
Right.
And then she just completely explodes in one scene towards Quatermass about
Yeah.
how he's using Victor and refuses to actually help him in any way. He's just using him for his experiments, which is completely correct, but it comes out of nowhere.
It's 100% right, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a missed opportunity, too, because there's a comment someone makes about, this early in the movie when they're discussing, like, wait, you just, like, launched this into space without telling anyone? Like, and he's like, oh, I don't need approval, you know. But then someone even asks, like, but did you think about, like, them? And he's, like, referring to, like, the astronauts' families and stuff. And it's like, okay, so this film's kind of raising that, and it sort of... I mean, we eventually get to the wife, but like, yeah, it's just not really as well developed as you'd like to see it be in a movie like this.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's no time for excess. The movie's 78 minutes long, at least in the version I saw.
I was going to say, I thought it was like 68 minutes, but yeah, it's 72, 75, yeah, somewhere around there, yeah.
Less than 90.
Yeah, it is less than 80, I believe, yes.
Yeah, Wikipedia has it listed as 82 minutes, but maybe I saw a version with 4 minutes.
I don't buy that for a second, but you're right, this could have multiple edits, especially because it was rated X, apparently.
Yeah, exactly, the Experiment. So the main problem I have with Judy here is that at a certain point, Quatermass and Briscoe are like, we really are out of our element here. Victor needs to go to a hospital. I forget what the straw is that breaks the camel's back there, but they do decide to transfer him, over to another hospital. I think because Judy is mainly like asking Quatermass, hey, you're not doing anything here. Please get him some real help. So he does go to a real hospital. But the problem is Quatermass is so controlling over this that he doesn't allow anybody, the press, the cops, and even Judy, to see this man, because they don't know what's going to happen to him over the next however long he's going to be in this sort of semi-catatonic state.
And the thing is, with Quatermass too, Quatermass could easily say, like, listen, this is for your safety. We're dealing with, like, radiation we don't understand. But he never even, like, gives Judith that, like, courtesy. He's just... Because, I mean, he could just lie, right? He's dealing with completely unexplained stuff. He could just... But no, he's just, like, he just denies access. It's... Yeah.
Yeah.
He's again, Quatermass is... He's a backdoor mad scientist. I stand by that.
He's just very controlling, and he's viewing Victor. Like, the film is called Quatermass Experiment, and I think if you look at it in a certain way, Victor is the experiment. He doesn't realize he's being used in that way, but he absolutely is. And I think Judy starts to
Well, and you're not even sure how much he's aware of anything, really.
Yeah, absolutely. But, like, my guess is that even before he agreed to go up into space, he probably didn't realize just how much he was being used as an experiment for Quatermass and his own ego, more so than anything else. Like, Quatermass didn't seek permission to send the rocket off into space. This was not about the glory of being the first people to travel beyond the atmosphere. This, because otherwise, he would have told people. This is about his own ego. So they send him to the hospital, but Judy, in one of the worst decisions I've seen in a movie in a long time, decides to break her husband out of the hospital. Even though, like I said, he's semi-catatonic, he's cold to the touch. He's clearly, you look at him, this is a man who is not well, and yet she still thinks to...
He looks like Raymond Massey in Arsenic and Old Lace, like with the kind of stitched up face. He's kind of got that look.
Absolutely. So Judy hires a private investigator to break her husband out of the hospital for some reason. That's my main hang up with the movie, is that Judy is just not a great character. Like, she's more of a frustrating character than anything else. And they
could have written it in a way, and maybe, if you're making this movie today, you would find a way to have this character just be, maybe she raises, like, she's frustrated with Quatermass, but she never outright suspects that he, like, is causing her husband to be like this. And, maybe she could be like, no, he's the reason he's sick. If she just, like, expresses that.
Yeah, she probably...
That's a significant solution, I think, to this conundrum.
Yeah, there's a way to do it. I think you're, like, right on the right track where, like, she's like, I need to get you away from him. That would be a great way to go about it, but it seems more selfish than anything else, the way it does happen. So when she does get this guy, Christie, to break Karun out of the hospital, Karun sees a cactus in the window and decides to go near it, and you don't exactly see what happens. You see his hand touch it, and it goes out of frame. And when Christy comes back into the room, because I think he had to get one thing or another, Victor throws the plant against the wall, and it just, the pot and the dirt just goes everywhere. And then in the elevator, he's trying to hide his arm that he touched the cactus with. It's like something's wrong there. And finally, Christy, I think, asks him what's wrong with your arm, and he just takes his arm from underneath the jacket he's hiding it under and smashes Christy with it.
He's got the Hulk hand kind of thing.
Pretty much.
About that size.
Yeah, you don't see it until later, but essentially what he's done is absorbed the cactus into his own skin, and has grown the size of the arm to like Hulk hand proportions, and has like has spikes in it and everything. So so he does see Judy on the way out, and Judy is just completely horrified because she sees, I guess, what's happened to him, and Karun runs away, and that's the last we see of Judy. Actually, she
that's right. Yeah,
they tell us later that she was found like a shaking mess. She couldn't say anything about what happened.
Judy went back to her home planet.
Exactly. Like, they realized the corner they wrote themselves into, so they just decided to write her out of the movie. So Karun is on the run. Christy is found in the elevator, or the lift, I guess, because this is a British film.
Right, yeah, here we go. Just don't confuse cookies and biscuits.
The main problem with Christy is that his body is just like a husk, Like, you can see a hole in his head, and it looks like hollowed out, like his whole body's been hollowed out, which is pretty interesting and gruesome effect for the 50s. Even if there's no blood, it's very shocking to see. But I also like the way they did it, because it's not like they just like left it, like deflated it like a like a beach mattress. Ball or something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's not like his body's just flopping on the ground. It's like bumps and stuff. Like, his bones are still in there, some of them, but his body is just deflated around it. It's really interesting, gruesome effect.
Absolutely.
So Karun is, wandering through the countryside while everyone's chasing after him. And that's kind of where the second half of the movie continues. Or, like, that's the main focus of the second half. Scotland Yard and Quatermass are both after him. He goes to a pharmacist and kills the pharmacist.
I like this scene. I like this scene a lot.
Absolutely. That's when you first see the hand, and you see exactly...
Yeah, exactly. It's a great reveal, because the guy's like, hey, what are you doing here? And he's like, wait a second. Are you sick? Because at first he just thinks it's a guy that's broken in, and then he sees it, and then like, let me help you.
Stuff. Take your coat off. Let me see. Let me see your arm, and then you see the arm, and it's one of the most gruesome effects I've seen in a 1950s movie. It's a gross looking arm,
and they say British healthcare is quality.
Clearly, the pharmacist should have been able to help him if this universal healthcare thing was so effective.
I think the NHS was around at that time. I'm not sure. I think it goes back to the 40s. I'm not positive.
I heard a health.
All I know is
joke.
I've had to pay into it multiple times because of visa issues, so that's frustrating.
I can understand having a personal vendetta at that point.
No, it's not even a vendetta. It's more just I don't know.
The pharmacist.
I like it. Complaining is a hobby.
Of course, it's
for anyone on the internet, but definitely for me.
Yeah. If you're on the internet, it's so much easier to complain than to be like, positive about things.
It's going to make for an interesting Bride of the Monster discussion, but let's see what we can do.
So, I don't quite know where else to go, like, beyond the chase, but I will mention...
Well, we've got our Jane Asher cameo.
Exactly. That was what I was going to get to, because I can't mention much about what Quatermass and the Briscoe and the Inspector Lomax, I don't know, like, they're all essentially just chasing after him. But the most interesting...
there isn't a whole lot of intrigue there.
Yeah, but the most interesting scenes happen, I guess, you do see that same sort of hollowed out body effect with the pharmacist, because they go there and find him. And then...
Listen, we gotta talk about Paul McCartney's 5-year-old girlfriend.
Exactly. Jane Asher shows up. Victor is like hiding out on a barge, I guess, and then Jane Asher shows up, and I
love the location. I love this scene's very well done too. The way it's shot is really neat.
This is like if you want to, like, equate Quatermass with Frankenstein. This is
your little girl throwing the flowers
except without murdering her at the end, which is good because it's a very charming scene.
Well, and we want Paul McCartney to find happiness in the early 60s too.
Exactly.
Jane Asher, of course, dated him for a while.
Yeah, and I want the Mask of the Red Death and Deep End to still exist.
That's right. She's in
world.
there.
Yeah, if you've ever seen Deep End, the Jerzy Skolimowski film, never received a home video release in this country, but it is just an incredible movie about one of the best movies about teenage love obsession that there's ever been. And she plays like the main object of this young kid's obsession. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Are you sure it's better than High School Confidential with Jerry Lee Lewis? And what's that guy's name? Dr. Jacoby.
Yeah, Russ Tamblyn. Jerzy Skolimowski, Albert Zugsmith, they're the same.
You're just making up names. These aren't real people.
No, Jerzy Skolimowski directed Deep End. Albert Zugsmith directed High School Confidential.
God!
He directed High School Confidential.
How did you know that?
He directed High School Confidential the same year he produced Touch of Evil by Orson Welles.
Oh my God, that's incredible! I didn't realize that.
It is an insane career.
What a high and low. That's incredible.
Do you know one of the best websites on the internet, Trailers from Hell?
I'm vaguely familiar with it. I know I saw the Mick Garris Robinson Crusoe on Mars video. And that's probably it.
Joe Dante, he started the website, and he is a fan. He's a fan of Albert Zugsmith. He directed a weird movie in the early '60s called Confessions of an Opium Eater, and
I've heard of that one. Yeah,
with Vincent Price. And he talks a lot about Albert Zugsmith's career because it's absolutely fascinating. When he directed stuff like High School Confidential, Confessions of an Opium Eater, Sex Kittens Go to College.
Oh, that's on our list. We'll get to Sex Kittens Go to College eventually, hopefully.
When I worked at the Library of Congress, I actually found a 35mm copy of the trailer in the archives, and I played it before, I think, Make Way for Tomorrow. I did a screening of Make Way for Tomorrow. And
I thought you were going to say you petitioned for Sex Kittens Go to College to be entered into the National Film Registry or something.
I could. I mean, it is a public poll. You can always enter movies in there. But no, it's interesting because
but not before Basket Case.
You're right. You're right. Clearly, I actually need to
James Wan just remade it this year. It's Basket Case has never been hotter. Now's the time.
But anyways, real quick before getting back to Quatermass, Albert Zugsmith, around the same time he directed all those exploity B movies. He produced Touch of Evil, The Incredible Shrinking Man, and the Douglas Sirk movie Written on the Wind. It's just a weird career this guy had.
Yeah, Incredible Shrinking Man, the Jack Arnold movie, one of the best 50s sci-fi movies. Absolutely.
Actually, looking at his filmography right now, Jack Arnold directed High School Confidential. That's their connection, I guess.
I didn't know that. Was he uncredited or something? I'm surprised.
No, I don't know. It's right here. This is the first time hearing of it too, or because I always associated with Albert Zugsmith, but
I don't think that's true for some reason. I don't find.
Okay, it's on
Jack
Wikipedia.
Arnold,
it's on IMDb. Jack Arnold.
Okay, I'll give you if IMDb, unless it's maybe it's a Howard Hawks directing The Thing from Another World type thing, something like that, where it'll just say his name uncredited, even though it hasn't technically been verified that he actually directed it.
It's not listed as uncredited. There's no uncredited.
Okay. Right.
It could be a similar situation to Thing from Another World where Howard Hawks essentially did direct it, but
do we know that for a fact? I feel like people have just said that.
Yeah, it could just be a big assumption, but I mean, Jack Arnold
the Spielberg Poltergeist thing is largely BS, as I understand it.
Yeah, pretty much. But the Jack Arnold thing, just looking at his filmography, he appears to have been kind of a journeyman after his original sci-fi run. He directed a lot of different stuff. But yeah, a year after Incredible Shrinking Man, he's listed as the director of High School Confidential. But it is more of an Albert Zugsmith
the 1950s
movie.
Version of Reefer Madness, basically.
Pretty much. But, then Albert Zugsmith did College Confidential himself, so it's
Yeah, I figured he probably did that one.
Seems more like his kind of movie than Jack Arnold's personal statement. If we're going to
go by the killer in high school.
Yeah, exactly. So if we're going to go by...
Which was a weird time for him to be making a high school movie, because it was right around the time he married a high school student.
What
who was
the
also
hell?
his cousin. So that was a
Oh my
weird era
god.
for Jerry Lee Lewis.
Oh my god. We showed In a Lonely Place on campus recently, and they had a Q&A afterwards just for people to discuss the movie, sort of like an open discussion. And I was the first to raise my hand because I wanted to get rid of the elephant in the room, which is that Gloria Graham was having sex with her 13-year-old stepson while they were making the movie.
Ooh, okay.
That was just funny to
Bit of an
bring up.
Asia Argento kind of situation, I guess.
Kind of, yeah. So, Quatermass. So, Karun meets the little girl, and, like, she keeps coming near him. And I think this is what's heartbreaking about the scene compared to the Frankenstein scene, is that Frankenstein does want to be, with the little girl, and
Right.
it's
Yeah.
largely born out of the knowledge that he is unaware of the strength that he has and the danger that he poses to this young girl. Whereas
Right,
it seems
yes.
like Karun is all too aware. And, like, he doesn't want her, like, getting anywhere close to him just because of how, even though she's like, you want to play? Like, she keeps, like, holding out her doll and asking
Yeah,
him to
she's
play.
very much like the girl in Frankenstein. She's not bothered by his appearance or anything like that. And there's something even sad in that.
Yeah.
Because you see just like the perfect kind of wholesomeness of a child's mind and heart or whatever,
Yeah, absolutely. It's great stuff. It's a great little, just from, if you want to compare the two, it is a great little twist on the Frankenstein kind of scene.
Yeah.
And she is left alive, and it leads to one of the funnier exchanges in the movie where the police are just bombarded with so many different calls and like false alarms and stuff because they have everyone scouring England for this guy, and they get a call from another lady saying that, oh, this weird man broke my child's toy, and they're like, forget this guy, we got more important things to do. So I find that hilarious that, like, you have
it's like the scene from In the Loop when he ignores the problems with the wall.
exactly
And that ends up being his political downfall.
Oh my God.
Steve Coogan's elderly mother's wall.
I love moments like that. I love moments where, like, the tiniest thing in a story that seems completely unnecessary ends up being, like, exactly what causes characters' problems. I think, like, I can't remember if that actually does lead them to Karun, but, this actually does go into, they do eventually find Karun, but it goes into, like, one of the best sort of reveals in the movie, which is the live TV broadcast. They're doing some sort of restoration thing on Westminster Abbey.
Right. Which I will say the interior and exterior of Westminster Abbey, really, really well done. I'm assuming, certainly the interior, they didn't shoot there. In fact, there's one scene where I can kind of see the matte line, but it still looks great. And the exterior, I also assume, wasn't shot there. It might have been, but really great looking. I mean, even if you haven't been there in person, just like it feels very authentic.
The exterior might be, because it is a pretty big set, but also, like, that was the day when they would. That's a good point, yes. That is the day when they would build giant sets on backlots, so, I can't judge it by modern standards. So anyways, I guess before we get into the Westminster Abbey scene, there is that little piece of Karun that falls off somewhere. It's very slimy and weird. And Quatermass and Briscoe find it, take it back to the lab, and realize, it's like growing and starting to like reproduce, like starting to like let off these little reproduction spores. So now they're assuming this thing might no longer be human because the one little fragment of Victor that is broken off, they put it in this glass cage and eventually gets so big that it breaks out of the cage. Luckily it dies before, because it can't because it's about to eat like a bunch of rats on the other side of the room, but it can't reach them in time, so it just dies on the floor. It's spread out like a starfish or something. And they go in and they find out about it, and they realize, so this thing is like really, really growing, like a lot of. So there's something about Victor eats like, or sucks the life forms out of like every animal at the zoo, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we missed that scene. Yeah, he shows up at the zoo. We don't see it happen, but the next day, like, the cops show up, or maybe Scotland Yard, and they were able to trace him there. And the guy, the zoo owner or some guy's like, well, what am I going to say happened to like my lions? Like all of his animals are gone. Like right now, don't say anything officially or something.
Yeah, a bunch of lions, bunch of tigers, all have like the same problems that the detective and the pharmacist have, where they're just like all the life is just sucked out of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically it's leading us to the Westminster Abbey scene. It's a roundabout way to get back to what I was talking about, which is that they don't know how big this thing has gotten. The mutation of this poor
we
guy.
have not seen it in a while, or they certainly haven't seen it in a while.
Absolutely. They don't know how big it's gotten. They know that it's reproducing and it could take over the country if they don't get it in time. So at Westminster Abbey, while they're looking for Karun or whatever he's become at this point, there is a live television broadcast all about the restoration going on. There's a restoration project occurring at Westminster Abbey, which means there's a lot of construction work and repair stuff around the building. And they have a TV studio where they count down a live feed, open up the camera, and find on the live feed a dead body just lying there that, like, right before they started the live feed, apparently fell from the scaffolding, and they don't know what's up there. So the TV cameras, they shut off the live feed, obviously, but I love that reveal. I love that reveal so much, where they have like the big countdown, they open it up, and it's just a slow fade in, and just this dead body lying there is just...
Imagine if we had that with the Notre Dame Cathedral when that burned down, and then you just cut to a live feed that's just a dead body on fire.
Oh my
there.
God. You know that would be everywhere, spread like wildfire.
I mean, it was everywhere, even without that.
Yeah, no, but I mean, like,
very big day for the internet.
God, it feels like we've lived 2 lifetimes since then. I completely forgot about it.
It really does so much. So that seems so long ago. It really wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, going back to Westminster Abbey, the dead body has fallen from the scaffolding, and when they finally are able to get a look up there, they see this giant blob of limbs, and Wikipedia describes
it's the octopus from Bride of the Monster.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it is kind of an octopus.
There is a similarity
monster.
there.
It's more active.
Although it moves.
Exactly. It does move. It is more active than the octopus from Bride of the Monster. And it appears to, instead of like, so the way, I'm just going to describe it the way Wikipedia does here, because this is the best way to describe it, is, quote, a gigantic shapeless mass of combined animal and plant tissue with eyes, distended nodules, and tentacle-like fronds filled with spores. Like, you can't get any better than that.
Okay, that's pretty good. I was going to say it's just a big version of Ditto, the Pokemon. Or is
that's
that
pretty good too, actually.
Yeah.
Ditto. The thing about Ditto is he can like transform into anything,
right?
So,
which is sort of what's happened with this guy.
Yeah, he's absorbed so many different
more of a Kirby effect, because he's kind of taking the powers or the qualities from these certain things that he touches.
Yeah, if Kirby left like lifeless husks.
Yeah,
and yeah, so they track down this creature, whatever he's become now, and they reroute a lot of electricity to be generated all to the metal scaffolding that the creature's on, and they just absolutely fry it, just like electrocute it to the point where it just catches on fire before, it can reproduce more and take over everything. So, yeah, everyone's sort of like, wants to ask Quatermass a bunch of questions after all that. And people are like, happy that the monster is gone and everything. And instead, Quatermass just walks out, very solemn look on his face, almost not solemn in the sense like he's sad or anything, but like the kind of look you'd have if you were a little bit in shock and also like kind of determined. So he just walks away from the whole situation.
Right. Yeah, the determined's a good word.
He walks away from the whole situation, and I think his assistant runs up to him or something, asks him what he's going to do, and Quatermass just says, "I'm going to start again." And that's the end of the movie. And so that's when it really clicked for me, like, oh yeah, this was absolutely, like, he's not a likable guy. He is just determined to feed his own ego.
Yeah, that last scene truly cements it, that it's like to me, the movie wasn't really about Quatermass until the last scene, and that kind of like brought it all back. And it's like, oh yeah, sure. Now you're thinking like, oh yeah, this is all the stuff that he did. Because you have a lot of these like, I don't know. I mean, it's like, think of, going back to the title, like think of King Kong, right? Ultimately, everything that happens in like the last third of that movie is Carl Denham's fault, because he brings the Kong creature to New York. It's not called like the Carl Denham Experiment or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, and I guess you could blame a lot of what happens in the first half because he's taking these people to this island that they've never heard of.
Pretty much. I do love how much King Kong is a movie about movie making, you know?
Oh, sure, that's your, well, you know, and we've got Ed Wood to talk about meanwhile, but yeah,
Yeah.
the best movie about movie making, probably.
100%.
Well, possibly.
No,
I mean, Matinee is another good one.
Ed Wood. I think the only two things that could
Dolomite
top
is
Ed
My
Wood.
Name. No, I agree. Ed Wood's the best.
I think Ed
But
Wood
there's
is
other
better
good
than
ones.
Dolomite, but you know, at that point, you're just comparing Larry
They're similar.
Karaszewski and
They're
Scott
similar.
Alexander scripts.
Yeah,
But I think
it's the same writers.
The
that's
only
right.
the only two, like Matinee is great, but the only two that I think
It's not really
could
about
give-
movie making. It's more about the movie going experience. It's like Targets.
Yeah.
Targets is kind of like that.
Yeah, pretty much.
I love
that.
Targets,
That's
by
actually
the
a
way.
great.
That's an
That's a
awesome
great
movie.
comparison point. It'd be a great double feature one day. Those two, Matinee and Targets, back to back. What I'm thinking is the only two movies. Last time I did like a list where I tried to put my favorites in any kind of order. The only
Okay.
two I put above Ed Wood that had to do with movie making were Day for Night, the Truffaut film, which absolutely.
Okay, I've never seen it. I've only seen 400 Blows. I'm not a Truffaut aficionado by any
Day for Night is so good. It's so
I had
enjoyable.
no idea it was about filmmaking in any capacity.
It's about nothing but filmmaking. It's just like
Okay.
a production from
I guess the
first
title.
day of filming. Yeah.
Come to think of it, the title.
It's a production
is
from
a
the first day of
filmmaking type
filming,
thing, yeah.
the first day of filming to the last day of filming, and just so many great little character bits that happen in between then. And so there's that film and Singing in the Rain, which is almost a matinee,
sure.
almost a matinee type thing where like you're not going to it because it's a movie about movie making.
Right.
But
it's like, I mean, The Artist in some ways was kind of a remake of that. Yeah, there is a lot of like stuff about filmmaking.
Yeah, and it's like it's not primarily what you go to it for. Like I go
Right.
to Ed Wood because I love movies about movies. Singing in the Rain isn't quite that, but it is a better movie. So I don't know how to judge that in that case.
I actually, personally, this is a hot take. I'm not a big Singing in the Rain fan. Personally, I think Ed Wood is a better movie. I understand that's blasphemy for a lot of old Hollywood aficionados. Not the biggest Singing in the Rain fan. It's a couple great musical numbers, and that's all I get out of that movie.
As an old Hollywood aficionado and having someone who's singing
Listen,
in the Rain is
it
probably in my
creates a
top
villain
10.
in the last act. Where does that come from? It's so random.
Are you talking about
Whatever her
why am
name
I-
is.
Yeah, exactly. Why am I blanking on her name? I mean, that's throughout the movie. She's a nuisance, and then she becomes a villain.
She's a nuisance. She's like a comic relief, and then all of a sudden she's like the antagonist, and I felt that was out of nowhere.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like the way you would define.
Listen, I don't want to shit on one of the greatest films of all time. I'm just
Hey,
saying.
no, you
Not the
my-
biggest fan of it.
My point was, you live your best life. You know, if you believe whatever
Sure.
you want to believe, if you don't like Singing in the Rain, go for it. And that's coming from someone who probably in my top 10. You know, it's a basic ass choice, and I've seen a lot of musicals in my day. I absolutely love.
It's in
the
my
genre,
top
but-
800. I'll give it that.
Well, that's
somewhere
not
in
that's
there.
not shabby. You know,
No, I don't
There's a lot-
dislike it.
A
I
lot
mean,
of movies
it's
out
a
there.
7 out of 10 for me. You know, it's
Yeah.
somewhere in there. You know what also is a 7 out of 10 for me? The Quatermass Experiment.
7 out of 10.
Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah,
I mean, we don't normally
that's a
like
good-
rate movies on here, but I think this is a solid science fiction film. It's not quite a masterpiece. I think of it like because I love 50s sci-fi. I love like quality 50s sci-fi. I love some bad 50s sci-fi too, but there's like tiers, right? You've got
Yeah.
your top tier of just like The Day the Earth Stood Still, Forbidden Planet. I love the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That's probably my second favorite behind The Day the Earth Stood Still. And War of the Worlds would be in there. And I think Quatermass is in that like second tier with like The Fly and The Blob I would put in there. Creature from the Black Lagoon. Like, these are really good movies. They're not quite masterpieces, but I like that this is I mean, it's a sci-fi monster movie, but it's more than just like a monster, like alarmist movie. There's something going on with Quatermass as a character, and there's some interesting sci-fi ideas too, and that's what I really appreciate out of it.
Absolutely.
It's also well shot. It's well acted. There's some impressive shots with like, I love all the cinematography in like the last scene with Quatermass
Yeah.
and everything outside of Westminster. I don't know. It's just really interesting. So what did you think of the Quatermass Experiment?
I personally really love it. The thing that gets me about a lot of 50s sci-fi is just the pace at which they're able to move a lot of movies, and this is one of the briskest and like most like relentlessly paced ones there is.
That's true. A lot of those movies have pacing issues because you just have these long scenes of exposition or something like that.
Exactly, especially
even
in America.
Godzilla has that. I love Godzilla, but that's got like the briefing scene and everything.
Yeah, and this one is just like all killer, no filler practically. You sort of get to it like as like there are exposition scenes, but they all do feel necessary to answer questions until you get to the chasing part in the second act.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're just on the edge of your seat practically because there's so much you don't know. You still never know what's happening with him, with Karun until like the very last act of the movie. And so you're wondering what's going to happen to everyone he encounters. And yeah, for me, I'm not old, but like the older I get, the more I am just interested in movies that are able to keep things at a really brisk, exciting pace. Beyond this does like I think the thing that's interesting is that you mentioned this has a lot of really interesting sci-fi ideas. It absolutely does, but it doesn't have as much social commentary and political commentary that a lot of people talk about when they bring up 50s sci-fi. But I don't think it needs it. I think it's just
like
good
any
story.
Space race thing is going to be talked about with the Cold War, obviously, but I agree that's muted here.
Yeah,
there's not a whole lot there.
Well, it's England as opposed to U.S. or
that could be the
Soviet
biggest reason
Union.
too. Yeah, it's not that Britain wasn't involved in the Cold War. Winston Churchill coined the term Iron Curtain, after all.
Yeah, absolutely, but that wasn't as big of a giant problem here in England as it was in America. It wasn't like the looming fear of nuclear winter, which
we'll see in Bride of the Monster, kind of.
Yeah, no, it's actually very interesting to look at the two of them in the same night, like I did. But yeah, I genuinely just really appreciate it on a like a filmic level, just how much it's able to move, how it never really gets uninteresting, the sci-fi ideas that are there, the fact that the monster is pretty unique and interesting for its time, especially. And
this is before the Blob.
Yeah, exactly. Like
there were similarities with the Blob, obviously. It's before the Blob. It's before Ditto.
Yeah,
before Kirby.
Well, I mean, the crazy thing is, this is a blob-like creature that just absorbs everything it comes into contact with. But at the same time, it's fleshy and gross.
Yeah, it's also not a blob from the beginning. We see it as a human and how it affects a human, and then eventually the reveal of it being this like blob thing. And you're right, it's not just a pure blob like the Jello or whatever, Ghostbusters 2 type thing. Like there's more to it than that. There's textures, and it's just interesting to look at visually. Weird looking fleshy, like with these long phallic octopus arms. Ben, you commented earlier on the name of the movie. Yeah.
And I think the Creeping Unknown is a good name for it if it wasn't about the mad scientist, because that really is kind of the way to describe the creature at the center of it all.
It's a good title. It's a bit too, for me, it's a bit too reminiscent of The Creeping Terror.
Or the Crawling Eye.
Which is possibly the worst monster movie ever.
Yeah, absolutely.
but we can't blame this movie for that.
Yeah, The Creeping Terror, The Crawling Eye, The Crawling Hand. I mean, it's similar to a lot of titles, but really, if you're going to describe this thing in any way,
Skull.
If you're going to describe this movie in any way, I think A Creeping Unknown is one of the best things. And I just looked up
Unidentified Creeping Object, perhaps, would be a decent title.
UCO.
UCO.
Yeah. I will say the other thing that I really appreciate about the monster, because I just looked up some more pictures of it, it's got like these weird little hair things at the top of it that's just really gross. It's good stuff. The only other movie I can think of that's like gorier than this or more gruesome, it doesn't come until I haven't actually seen Fiend Without a Face, so it could be. That would be before.
It's a few years after this, but that's probably it's also a British sci-fi movie.
What I actually was going to bring up was The Brain That Wouldn't Die.
Oh, yeah. That's a little bit later, too. Yeah, that's a surprisingly gruesome movie for its day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bad movie, but like they rip a
That's
guy's
the first
arm
Mystery
off.
Science Theater 3000 episode I think I ever saw. I think so. It's either that or Soul Taker.
That's not a bad one to start with because it's like it has to kind of, because Mike is taking over as host, it has to kind of reintroduce
Yeah, that's
the
literally
story.
Mike's first episode, right?
Yeah, it has to like kind of reintroduce the story of the show and like ease you into it, but
The
also
story being used a little loosely here, but yeah.
but the writing is at like such a high level already. Like when that happens, that
Well,
like,
I love the honey roasted joke. Always stood out to me.
yeah,
And when he's running around with the fake head and it's like wrapped up and he's got it like under his arm and he's like, he's at the 40, the 30, no one will catch him. It's some great stuff. I love that movie.
there aren't really many other movies from that period I can think of that are as gruesome. So it really does earn that experiment title, you know?
Yeah.
So that's what I got for Quatermass. What do you got for Bride of the Monster?
Well, okay. So here we go. 1955 from director Edward D. Wood Jr. When did he just become Ed Wood? Because I feel like
I think that's
like
just
he's credited as Edward D. Wood.
that is just a like an easy way to refer to him after his death, because I'm pretty sure even in like the late porno movie days of his life, I'm pretty sure the scripts were the credits still read as Edward D. Wood Jr.
Yeah, I guess, well, you know, if you have a junior, don't use a middle initial also. Don't give us four things to say. Who are you, Jean-Claude Van Damme? Come on, keep it simple. Yeah. 2 or 3 tops. Sometimes 1 if you're a Brazilian athlete or Madonna, or Beyonce, Elvis, you know. So, Bride of the Monster, this is an Ed Wood movie, which means we are dealing with some utter nonsense. I will say you know, going back to, you said this wasn't as enjoyable as the other Ed Wood movies you've seen. And for me, I've never seen Glen or Glenda. I've just seen this and Plan 9. I think maybe there's like another. Did he do The Violent Years or something? Like he wrote a couple other movies I've seen. Yeah,
he wrote The Violent Years, and I find that more enjoyable than Bride of the Monster.
Okay.
But that's kind of because
seen that one in forever.
That's kind of because teenage rebellion movies are a little bit more fun for me than
the High School Confidential type films.
Yeah, than like bad bad teen rebellion movies are more enjoyable than bad sci-fi. But
well, the bad sci-fi, mad scientist, horror, monster movies, dime a dozen. I've seen so many of them.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Though you've got The Room, which is like a teen rebellion, but with adult characters.
Pretty much.
You think about it.
I mean, he really wanted...
He thought he was James Dean.
Yeah, he really wanted to make Rebel Without a Cause, you know? And that's... I don't know how how that happened. So, going through Ed Wood's filmography real quick, I have seen Plan 9, obviously. Okay. I've seen Glen or Glenda, and I genuinely like Glen or Glenda quite a bit. It is weird, trippy.
Like, not as a bad movie, as like a weird experimental movie.
Yeah, exactly. Because
the Eraserhead of its day.
Kinda. You haven't seen it. You would be shocked at how well... I haven't seen it.
I'm just throwing out a suggestion.
You would be shocked at how well that comparison works.
I know it's experimental, but I don't know how much of it is truly experimental and how much of it is just Ed Wood was a crazy person. There's a little bit of that, I think, in everything he does.
At a certain point, and you know, a lot of people talk about this in film school. Like at a certain point, why should the intent matter anymore?
I understand that.
Yeah, it's like you know what Ed Wood, you could probably guess what Ed Wood was going for, but it's so experimental and crazy that why should who cares if it's intentional? You know, it's there. You're just looking at what's on screen and you are just baffled by it. So I really like that. Also, just for how ahead of its time it was. Really, obviously it's dated now, but you know,
but I know what you're talking about. There.
Really accepting and loving of all different kinds of people from the LGBTQ spectrum before there was any such thing.
Yeah, because Ed Wood was just, in his day anyways, he was just considered a cross-dresser. He may or may not have been trans. I've never really looked into anything about his personal life in that sense, but I know he was just kind of written off as he dresses like a woman. He wore a bra and panties when he served in World War II under his uniform or whatever, which I don't even know if that's true. That's a line in Ed Wood.
I think that part is true. That's in all his biographies and stuff. Yeah, I don't really know. I showed my partner Glenn or Glenda, not Glenn or Glenda. I showed her Ed Wood recently.
I
And
thought
showed
you
her,
said your partner is Glenn or Glenda.
oh,
My
that
partner, Glenn or Glenda. Oh, you named you named
whatever
them after the
whatever her
movie.
name is, I forgot.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Anyways, yeah, we watched Ed Wood and, explained some of the stuff that I had read about Ed Wood over the years. And she was wondering, like, do you think, she was really guessing, like, he probably was queer or transgender on some
Yeah,
level,
I would
but he
probably
probably didn't have the
the vocabulary.
vocabulary or the probably self-confidence either to, like,
Or
he had.
yeah, or the community. There's no one to like reach out to and ask for advice about this kind of thing.
Yeah, because he was definitely part of whatever community there was out there, especially when you go
Sure.
into his porno years. But at the same
Well,
time, he was probably
yeah.
just so filled of self-hatred that he didn't want to apply any of that to himself.
And if you see this film, you understand why there's some self-hatred.
Yeah, big time.
I kid, but this movie is garbage. But I mean,
Yeah.
it's a fun garbage. It's not the most fun garbage, but
Exactly.
listen. But anyways, the reason I brought up the other Ed Wood films is I was just like, I thought I remembered Criswell in this, and I was so disappointed there was no random stupid Criswell
Yeah.
prediction, because that to me is just like the one of the weirdest things
man.
you can put in front of a movie,
I think Night of the Ghouls opens up with
which
Criswell
is
coming out of the
sequel to
coffin.
this movie. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And like Criswell comes out of the coffin and does like a little intro. That's just such a
Yeah.
great opening for a movie. They took it like straight. They took it like almost word for word for Ed Wood, just because of how
Yeah.
good it was.
Future events such as these are reminiscent of what will come in the future. There's
Yeah.
weird dialogue like that, and you do get some really weird dialogue in this movie. There was a "I know what you said, but I didn't hear you" line, which I wrote down because that one stood out to me. There's a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, that was another one recreated for Ed Wood, because that's the one scene his girlfriend is in.
Oh, that's the Sarah Jessica Parker part. That's right.
Exactly.
Okay.
Sarah Jessica Parker is like the first girlfriend, and she's going to play the lead in Bride of the Monster.
Yes, and they
but
give
then
her the
she's-
smaller role.
Yeah, she's cut down to that role, which is so funny because, in Ed Wood, they have an argument like you could play the office assistant, the file clerk, and
Right.
I guess she just plays the assistant because she comes on for like one scene. But even the old lady who plays the file clerk has a bigger role.
It has a bigger part, yeah.
She's the smallest female talking role in this entire movie. God, what a middle finger to your girlfriend.
Well, if that is that part even true though? Was that really his girlfriend? Do we know that?
That was really his girlfriend. The question
what an
about
asshole.
how it all happened, was it really that Ed Wood thought that the woman who is the star of this movie was going to put up all the money for it? That is the story. That appears to be the main thing that people say about it. And a lot of this knowledge that we have about Ed Wood came out in the 80s and 90s when stuff like Dolores Fuller, who is that woman, who's the girlfriend of Ed
That's
Wood.
the Sarah Jessica Parker.
Yeah, like that was when she was still alive. So she could have contradicted it at any time, but the source could have come from her. I read the biography of him that a lot of this information comes from, called Nightmare of Ecstasy, and a lot of it is made up.
Isn't there something, maybe it's not a biography, it's like a box set, but there's like a look back in Angora or something like that. That's a title of something.
Yeah, I think it's a title of like a full documentary about it, which I would love to see one day, but I've only read the book. And that does have a lot of like direct quotes from people, so there's probably stuff in there about that, but it's been several years since I read it. Yeah, what were some of the other, did you find any other lines that are just odd?
That was the only one I
can think of a couple.
specifically wrote down, but I know there are a lot of them.
Well, my favorite scene...
Well, there's the ones. Well, first of all, the last line of the movie is like my favorite line ever. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. We have two fantastic closing lines in both movies tonight, and I gotta say I prefer the Bride of the Monster one just because how random it is.
Yeah.
They're so clearly trying to do a King Kong thing, and they just fail
Absolutely.
completely, and that's what's lovely. But yeah, what are some of those? Well, there's that. I don't remember the specific lines, but I know that like the horrible exposition scene where they talk about like maybe all the atom bombs is what's causing the storms. Like every line in that scene when those two guys show up in the swamp is like the weirdest line ever.
The two guys show up in the swamp. You mean the guys at the beginning, or?
No, the one of them is The
Oh, when they drive out
boyfriend,
there.
the cop guy.
Yeah.
And the other guy I don't think is ever introduced. I think he just shows up. I don't
Oh,
think we know who that guy is.
See,
I assume he's a
was
cop.
wondering. I thought I missed something there.
Yeah, I thought so too. Because we get, early on, we get the cop. We get like the really eager, like nervous cop, and he's the guy at the end who's got like the shaky gun, I assume. But I
Definitely,
thought maybe
that's-
that was him, but in that scene, and it's not. But anyways, we gotta talk a little bit about the plot here.
Yeah, go for the story.
Because you mentioned the first scene, we do have two people showing up in the swamp. It's a classic old dark house type, setting where they're stuck in a rainstorm. I guess they're hunters. They went out hunting at night, which seems like not a great idea. But they're like, okay, we need to find shelter. Oh, there's that old house. It's like, oh, but there's a monster there. And they're like, you don't actually believe that. But they show up to the house where Dr. Vornoff now lives. Dr. Vornoff, of course, played by the legendary Hungarian actor Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
One of the all-time most iconic horror stars who I recently compared to Arnold Schwarzenegger in that he's one of the worst actors ever, but like there's just been certain parts that he's absolutely perfect for, and he kind of like made his entire career off of basically just Dracula,
Yeah, like you can't.
And he's good in some other movies, but
Yeah, he is very good at certain times, like in the right spot. Like
the Black Cat and the Raven, he's really good in both of those. Son of Frankenstein,
Yeah,
he's great.
Very different roles from like in terms of the type of role, anyways, from Dracula. His secondary role in Island of Lost Souls is really powerful.
Oh, I know I've seen that. I don't remember it that well though.
Yeah, he's like the.
Is that a Moreau adaptation? Is that what that is?
Yeah, it's an Island of Dr. Moreau adaptation. Yeah, he's the man animal. I've
definitely
begging
seen
the
that,
question, like, are we not men? And he brings a lot of gravitas to that little performance. So
he's got a similarly emotional, dramatic monologue in this scene, which actually I kind of love and hate that scene, that speech, because it's like it's performed weirdly, but at the same time he brings some humanity to it, even though it feels like every line he's delivering incorrectly. There's like still something about it where it kind of works in a way.
It really does. I didn't want to get too much into it yet, but it really is like a genuinely good scene, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's the best scene of the movie. It's probably the least funny scene in the movie too.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, anyways, Vornoff doesn't let these people in, and Vornoff also has Lobo, played by Tor Johnson, who's his man at arms. He's his giant man assistant.
Yeah.
Who originally, because the rumors that there's a monster here, they think that's the monster. It's not.
Unfortunately, Tor Johnson is silent throughout the film, which is a shame.
That's right. I don't know. I've seen Plan 9. I think it's good that he's silent.
No, but that's the thing is I would just love to hear him
They
talk.
give him all the dialogue and you can't understand a word he says. But yeah, anyways, this is one of 3 films in which Tor Johnson plays a character named Lobo. Obviously, one of the others is a sequel to this. But there's some other movie from like the mid-50s where he played the character of Lobo that has no connection to Ed Wood. So was like Lobo just like a name for like a big brute man at some point?
Well, the other one was The Unearthly, I'm pretty sure, because I've seen
which is also
The Unearthly.
That's also a Mystery Science Theater one, isn't it?
Yeah, I've seen most of the episode, but it's just kind of a low key episode to put on in the background because it's got John Carradine, it's got Tor Johnson, it's got Allison Hayes from Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, like just a good time to keep on in the background. But I haven't really like paid too much attention to it. But that's where his famous line,
the time for go to bed.
Exactly, time for go to bed.
Yes.
That's part of the reason why I wish he
that is time for go to bed is Tor Johnson's "You talking to me?" Or no, it's even better than that. No, it's his, and this technically isn't a line ever actually spoken by the actor, but it's his "You dirty rat," because that's like the Tor Johnson line. That's like if you are imitating Tor Johnson, I don't know why you would, but that's the line you choose. Which that's the James Cagney line.
He was a Halloween mask for years, so
that's right.
Clearly,
yeah,
people have an attachment to him.
Well, yeah, I mean, but there's a difference between dressing up as him and doing a Tor Johnson impression. I think, but yes,
just every time you're at a party, just break out that Tor Johnson impression. All the ladies love it, you know.
Yeah,
there's no connection to Ed Wood in that movie, other than the fact that like similar character.
Similarly washed up old horror star in Carradine versus Lugosi.
Exactly. Takes place in one house where like there's some weird goings on.
Carradine was also Dracula. Carradine was Dracula in House of Dracula, I think, one of the Universal movies.
Probably,
maybe
honestly,
House of Frankenstein, maybe both of them.
You could tell me John Carradine played any role and I would believe it. That man has like 500 credits.
John Carradine continues to be in movies to this day, I think. There's so much just random unconnected footage of him that you could throw John Carradine in like John Wick and, I'm not batting an eye.
That would be amazing if he showed up in John Wick.
He plays the Ian McShane part.
But Tor Johnson, I was on the IMDb page because I was checking about the Unearthly. And it says the first in line of trivia here, in the film Mad Max, the Halloween mask Mel Gibson puts on at his home is a Tor Johnson mask.
I do not remember a Halloween mask in Mad Max.
I don't remember that either, but
I know eventually in one of the Mad Max movies, might be the first one, might be the Road Warrior. I think it's the Road Warrior. The villain wears a hockey mask, which is not the Jason Voorhees mask, and it's not even the Roy mask from Part 5, but it is the exact same type of mask that they use for the poster of Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. An interesting fact, found interesting by precisely 2 people on this earth, probably, but hey, it's out there. Bride of the Monster. So, after these 2 hunters are sent away, because Vornoff will not let them into his home, one of them, it takes some imagination here to connect some shots, but one of them stumbles upon the monster. And the monster is an octopus. We have a lot of stock footage of the actual octopus underwater, and we have some shots of a person tangled up with like an octopus prop that is not moving. The actor has to make it move, and that's one of the best scenes of Ed Wood when I think is it Lugosi? Because eventually Lugosi's character gets involved, gets tangled with the octopus, but I think it's one of Lugosi's stunt doubles. But there's a very fun scene in Ed Wood where they're shooting that scene with Bela Lugosi, and he's just screaming and swearing because the water's so cold and stuff.
Yeah, amazing scene in Ed Wood. This scene in Bride of the Monster, though, every time I have to go back and watch it because the old story about how they didn't get the motor for the octopus, and so anyone who had to like wrestle with it or make it seem like the octopus was attacking them had to move the arms themselves. I swear.
Do you dispute that? Well, I know the motor thing is not true.
The motor thing isn't true?
Well, maybe not specifically the motor part, but according to the film Ed Wood, they just steal it from like a studio backlot.
Oh yeah, that part is
definitely
fictionalized. Yeah.
But no, I think there might be movement in this scene. In the other scenes, because there's at least 1 or 2 other times the octopus has somebody.
Yeah, we can get to a couple
there,
of them.
it's very apparent that someone has to make it move, but that could be just a difference between the actor. This actor isn't as good in this scene as this hunter guy is.
Could be. Yeah, this hunter guy, there's definitely a lot more movement, and it's not believable because the head of the octopus isn't moving, but like the legs look like they're moving of their own accord at least.
Okay. I mean, it's no killer eye tentacles from Charles Band. Those are in Charles Band, David Dakota. If you want quality looking moving tentacles,
I'll put that on top of my list for tentacle action.
Don't watch it. It's basically a softcore porn. It's a terrible movie, but there's some quality tentacle props.
It's David Dakota going on there. But Bride of the Monster, going to this scene where the hunter is being killed, I find it hilarious how the guy has exactly 1 scream. And it is repeated
I was going to say that. It's so
minutes.
repetitive. Because the scream itself is a fine scream, but we don't need to hear it 40 times. And then my favorite part about this scene is how quickly not how quickly, but when the other hunter just gives up on him, he just like turns and like leaves. It's so like
Well, he doesn't
casual.
He's about to turn and leave, and then he gets caught by Lobo.
Well, yeah, but you can almost like hear it in his mind. He's like, "Well, I tried." Like you're right. Lobo
he used like his 2 shells on the octopus. And by the way, can we just say the octopus is not a monster? Like.
No, like it's a human animal.
It's just an octopus.
It's a living animal.
They don't even clarify it as being anything beyond an octopus. Like if I was living in this town, I wouldn't be like, oh, the monster that lives up by the old Willow's place. I'd be like, oh, the octopus that lives up there.
It seems you ever heard of this octopus? Reasonably large for octopi. I'm no octopus expert. And, you can imagine, like, when they're doing the stock footage and it's just the octopus underwater, maybe they were, like, hoping that, like, okay, we want to, like the, what's that Ray Harryhausen movie? They're trying to get you to feel like it's a giant octopus. But then when we see someone in its clutches, it's maybe pretty big for an octopus. Probably slightly bigger than they tend to be, but it's not. It's like human size. It's not like,
But they just never...
It's not the size of a whale.
Like, they don't even specify that in the dialogue. Like, oh, look at that giant octopus that we have.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
They just say, this is the monster, and then you look at it, it's an octopus.
Well, and also we learned that Vornoff is responsible for the Loch Ness Monster. Like, he created an actual monster. Couldn't he get something better than this?
All the stock footage on hand, and that's the monster you go with. I don't know. I can't say.
Yeah, well, it's probably that's the prop they had, so they had to have the stock footage kind of match it, if I had to take a guess.
Yeah,
because with B movies, you always wonder, like, certain things. Okay, which came first, the premise or the prop? If it's, or like, if you have like Grizzly, the film we did earlier this season, which came first, the killer bear plot or that you had access to a trained bear? Which came first?
Exactly.
I don't know.
Exactly. I know. I've come across like certain props or things or just whatever in my life and been like, oh, I have access to this. I should make a movie around it.
Right.
And God bless the people who do.
I guess. I mean, if this is the result, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I second that. But no. I mean, again, love this movie. So, and I will say, you said, Lobo sneaks up on this hunter, and I will say this is the sneakiest Lobo's been. There's like 3 or 4 times where Vornoff just delays. He's talking to a character and he just like delays, and then Lobo is just like behind them and he's there for like 5 seconds too long, and then he makes his move. This is the sneakiest Lobo is the entire movie. Good for him.
He's got some level of stealth to him.
Well, he's mute. That helps. He can't speak.
Yeah.
So after this exciting opening, we then get to kind of the boring scenes. These are like the investigation scenes. These are the exposition scenes. But we do get kind of a fun little cast of characters. And really, it's just like one character who I kind of enjoy. It's Captain Robbins, played by Harvey B. Dunn, who is... He looked familiar, and I looked him up, and he's like a Mystery Science Theater 3000 legend. He's in like 4 or 5 movies they did. He's in, well, maybe just like 3, but The Sinister Urge... Which is that connected to Ed Wood? Is that even a Mystery Science Theater film? It is. It was directed and co-produced by Ed Wood.
That's one I haven't seen, but it is, directed and possibly written.
And he's also in Teenagers from Outer Space, which I know is a Joel episode.
Yeah, he's been... Harvey B. Dunn was in a lot of B movies. I can't even remember which ones I've seen and which ones I haven't.
Yeah, oh yeah, those are probably the only ones I have seen.
Teenagers from Outer Space, is he the one that...
He's also in My Fair Lady? What? He's an uncredited extra in My Fair Lady. Oh, okay.
That's right up there.
I believe that.
Right up there with Coleman Francis. His last role was in Beyond the Valley of the Dolls.
Well, that's actually fitting, though. Like,
that
Harvey
does
B.
fit him
Dunn in a Best Picture winner doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but okay. Like, Valley of the Dolls, that's the type of movie that Coleman Francis would have made if he had a bit more of a budget and more talent, maybe. I mean, his ambitions...
Although the main difference being Russ Meyer actually likes people, or at least their breasts.
Well, yeah, that might be the only thing.
Coleman Francis doesn't like anything or anybody.
He likes Tor Johnson.
That is true.
BC Yucca Flats. Well, does he? I guess I'm not up on my Coleman Francis. I don't
know. Beast of Yucca Flats.
Are his movies just incredibly cynical?
Very.
See the David Cronenberg of the
bleak.
1960s.
If he had a budget, I'm telling you, he would have been like respected as an art filmmaker, because his movies are so cynical and just nothing but bleak people just ruining each other.
And John Carradine's beautiful singing voice.
Oh, yeah. God bless him for being the only person to have the balls to give John Carradine a theme song. Well, I thought Harvey B. Dunn was in more stuff, but now I'm looking at it, you got My Fair Lady, but Bride of the Monster, Teenagers from Outer Space. He was also an extra in Sabrina, too.
I was just going to say, well, he's, uncredited party guest with Trey. Big
year before Bride of the Monster. So, Billy Wilder, Ed Wood, they're just 1 degree away from each other.
That's amazing. Well, it's like, Brink Stevens is in This Is Spinal Tap. I learned that the hard way because I lost a bet on that on this podcast. She's also in, well, I guess Psycho 2 is not shocking, or was it Psycho 3? I don't know. Bring Stevens, a bunch of random, like, uncredited roles in, like, A movies, which is weird.
I love finding people like that. I want to do an entire movie one day that's just about a Hollywood extra. I don't know what the story would be yet, but I want it to happen one day.
Well, speaking of not knowing where we're going with it,
Yeah.
neither does Ed Wood with Bride of the Monster, because we meet our characters. Harvey B. Dunn plays Captain Robbins, who's got a bird for no reason. This is trademark classic bad movie stuff, is you always have like weird character quirks. I shouldn't say always, but oftentimes that are like never really explained. They're just there. And you wonder, like, is that just something the actor brought? You know, but you don't know. And that's like, I love the questions that this film raises, in not in any kind of like philosophical sense, but
Honestly, the fact that you have Kelton the cop, who I only know because Joe Dante and Will Sloan from the Important Cinema Club talk about it a lot. Paul Marco, like the sort of Weasley cop guy. And then you have
he's that one.
Yeah, Captain Robbins. The two of them are just so much more entertaining than the lead we have.
They are, yeah. And that's the thing, is like we don't even know the male lead, who's Dick Craig. We don't even really know he's a cop in this scene. He just sits down with Captain Robbins. He's talking to him. First, we meet
I guess he
Kelton
is, yeah.
first. Yeah, it's never, well, because he's always in, I think Kelton is the only one who's ever in a cop uniform. They're all wearing suits.
Oh, you're
Maybe
right.
Kelton isn't even. I don't know. I think he's in a cop uniform, at least at the end of the movie. But
yeah, you're right.
He's just talking to him, and they're talking about the news stories of the monster. You know, Monster snatches another two or whatever. You know, we've got that thing going on.
Right under the old new tax reformations or whatever. The one fake newspaper that was in every movie.
Okay, I was going to say, well, you know, you can't expect them to use lorem ipsum for the newspapers in this movie, because they use that to write the script. This is where we meet kind of, I would probably call her our lead, Janet. Mm-hmm. Who is the fiance of Dick. She comes in, she's a journalist. She is upset with Dick because he's meeting, this is another thing where this makes you think he's not a cop, because she's upset. Like, oh, I haven't been able to get a hold of you, and here you're meeting with Captain Robbins. Like, I thought I could trust you. It's like, but he's his boss. She's talking to him as if like he's like a rival journalist or something. It's just weird, because she's complaining about, I don't know. It's just a weird scene.
I mean, if I can be honest, I don't think the script knows either.
That's probably true.
And you say Janet is the lead. I completely agree with that, but she does like disappear halfway in. But we'll get to that later.
Well, so does Bela Lugosi. He's replaced with a stunt double.
Oh, well, that too, yeah. But Janet doesn't even have the courtesy of a stunt double. Her character is just gone.
Yeah. It's we've got a co-lead situation with Dick and Janet, I think.
Yeah, I just find Janet more interesting. I just wish more time was on her.
Well, yeah, I like the 50s kind of like I mean, she's a businesswoman. It's not the right word. She's a journalist. I like there's like a drive to her character.
Yeah.
Like, that's fun.
Exactly.
You don't always see that in 50s movies. We were just complaining about a woman in the last movie. I mean, rather the writing of a woman, excuse me. I'm not
just complaining about
there's a woman in this
Quatermass
movie.
Experiment.
Listen, I come from the 1580s stage. We don't have women act.
Put Janet in the role of Judy in Quatermass Experiment, and you got yourself a masterpiece. Masterpiece of science fiction right there. Just don't change any of her lines.
Yeah. Does she finance Quatermass? Because then I could see the budget dropping a bit. So Janet is on this monster story. Captain Robbins obviously denies, hey, it's no monster. He's 20th century. We don't have monsters. And then so she kind of leaves. She's doing her thing. And then we meet this other character named Professor Strowski. He is from they never say where he's from, but given his accent, I'm going to say he's from the border of, where Alberta borders with Germany, Russia, and Poland. The accent changes a bit, which actually kind of makes sense with how when we learn more about the character later on. But even in that scene, his accent changes a bit. So
yeah, I mean, like, you can only give it so much credit, but it is interesting. He is an interesting character.
He's not who he appears to be. Just like Quatermass, perhaps. But he claims to be a monster expert. He says, like, hey, are you familiar with Loch Ness? Well, the monster here has some similarities to that. And then he agrees to go investigate with Dick Craig. They're going to go to the swamp to investigate. And he's like, hey, let's go during the day. And then they're like, but supposedly the monster only attacks at night. And he's like, yes, but we should start the preliminary investigation during the day.
It's a really strange exchange.
Yeah, it is. It is weird. It's a weird setup. And then they didn't even go together. And it turns out when we next see Dick and he's with that other cop, the guy we never really get introduced to, the guy who's just there.
Yeah.
They both head to the swamp and then they're like, oh, where's Strowski? He's supposed to meet us there. And I'm like, what? You didn't like arrange this? They're like, oh, that's a funny thing that Strowski, he agrees. I think they used the word appointment. He agrees to an appointment with us in this swamp, and then he doesn't show. And I'm like, what? You couldn't have taken the same car together? I mean,
where Strowski's from out of town. Was he just staying at a hotel?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point.
Does he have his own car?
He specifically mentions a hotel. He does. He Ubered his way over there. But we are missing the scene. We're skipping the scene, rather, where Janet, I guess, gets in a car accident.
Something like that.
I guess that's the implication.
She
more just kind of stops her car and falls out of it.
The car is against a tree. That's
yes.
what we know.
That's
how the scene ends.
The car is near a tree.
That is how the scene ends. We don't know how it got there.
No. It doesn't end that way because Lobo picks her up.
Oh, no, yeah, the scene doesn't end, but like the end result of the car. The car is on the tree. We don't know if it crashed into it, if it just stopped, but it's right next to a tree.
Ran out of gas when she was about to hit a tree, perhaps?
Yeah, and honestly, what a perfect time to run out of gas.
Although when you run out of gas, you don't just like immediately stop. Like I'm sure that's how I thought cars worked when I was a kid, but she ran out of gas several hundred yards back, I guess, and just kept slowing down. So Lobo takes her in, and Vornoff and Janet are speaking. Janet knows who he is because she's a journalist. Vornoff also knows who she is, but pretends he doesn't for some reason. And then when she learns that he knows who she is, she's upset with him for asking questions. Just some weird dialogue here. And then this is where we learn that Lobo is mute. Vornoff whips him because why not? And I love Bela Lugosi. I don't know how old he actually is here. Let me look up when he was born. 1882. So yeah, he's actually older than I thought he was. I mean, he looks old, but I don't know how much of that was just kind of, we know what went on with his life and kind of how he spiraled further down with drugs and stuff. So, but no, he is a fairly old guy here. Mm-hmm. But old man Bela Lugosi whipping Tor Johnson is like the least forceful looking action, I guess. Like it doesn't look like Tor's remotely being hurt, and it's fine.
Yeah.
So he's an old man.
Yeah, what can you do? You can only suspend your disbelief so much.
And this, of course, should be noted that this is Bela Lugosi's last speaking role. He obviously appears in Plan 9 4 years later, sort of. He appears in that the same way Bruce Lee appears in Game of Death, where it's mostly a stand-in. I think it's Ed Wood's chiropractor. I think that's the story there. But yeah. So Dick and whatever that other cop is, whoever he is, they decide to keep like looking into things. And then Vornoff at one point puts Janet to sleep because he's got like hypnosis powers.
Well, all Bela Lugosi characters do.
Yeah, I guess that's true. It's a big white zombie thing. He does it in Dracula a little bit. He tries to do it on Van Helsing, but then Van Helsing pulls a crucifix. Yeah. It's a Bela Lugosi tradition.
Yeah, and Ed Wood, it's almost like the character of Dr. Vornoff is not like an original character except for
he is
maybe his backstory scene. Exactly. He is Ed Wood's love of mad scientist movies. Like
100%.
Boiled down to its pure essence.
With very, very loose lip service paid to the Cold War.
Yeah.
Because it's implied maybe he's from Russia. They never say what country, but they always say, like, your country, my country. Like, they know the implication you can imagine is Russia. For whatever reason, they didn't say Russia or the Soviet Union, but I think that the implication is Cold War or something.
Well, there is the Cold War, but then there's also Professor Strowski, who does vacillate between, like, like a German and, like, slightly more Eastern European accent.
Yeah.
And talking about his country, and Dr. Vornoff talks about making
most of that comes from Strowski. That's right.
But then Dr. Vornoff is like using Cold War lingo to talk about creating a race of supermen. So
a rice of people. To quote the famous phrase,
a rice of people. Just saying that without his accent just sounds so goofy.
A rice of people,
like the master race, almost, you could say.
Yeah, which I guess that's not really Cold War lingo. That's like Hitler
he's
in Germany, but yeah.
he's saying he's using atomic weapons to do it, which
That's right. Yeah, there's
God,
the Cold
God
War
only
stuff,
knows
yeah.
how that's going to work. But so it's really interesting. It's like a bizarre mixture of Cold War and World War II, just like using this sort of lingo that we learned over the last decade. Well, being in the 1950s, you would have learned over the last decade to fuel some kind of social commentary. Question mark?
Yeah.
In one scene, which I don't know if you want to get to.
Yeah,
now,
it is,
but
which is the
pretty
best
much
scene in the
one
movie.
scene.
We mentioned that. And we'll get to it, because we might as well get to it now, because Strowski does show up to the swamp. He shows up by himself in his own car, possibly stolen, we don't know.
Did he
goes
drive
inside.
there? Did he drive to the city, wherever the city is?
Well, he came from, like, Loch Ness or something, so I don't know.
Oh, yeah, he followed him
drive
across
from
the
Scotland?
world. So,
Yeah.
so before we get into the scene, Dr.
Okay.
Varnoff is behind the Loch Ness Monster, is the theory,
Yes,
right?
that is confirmed. And what other monsters do they mention? Maybe
I
nothing
forget.
real. I mean, I know Loch Ness Monster's not real, but you know what I mean? Like, we know what it is.
I think he said, I followed you from this place to Loch Ness and now to here. I don't think he mentions any more
Well, he's
monsters.
like, I missed you. I'm in Loch Ness. I missed you by a week. In somewhere else, I missed you by 3 days. In this other place, I missed you by a day. It's like there's a funny structure to how he says that. You expect there to be like another joke, like and in this other place and. And in Fouke, Arkansas, I was there before you were, or something like that. There should be like a joke there.
Yeah, absolutely. If it was a comedy, but we're not necessarily dealing with comedy here unless it involves Officer Kelton or the captain with this weird bird.
Well, the bird I don't even think is really supposed to be. It's just there. I don't think the bird. I think the bird is just what it is. It's exactly what you think it is, which is something. I don't know. But yeah, Officer Kelton, definitely a bit of a Barney Fife vibe. A lot of yes sir, no sir.
Absolutely, big time.
We do see him when he holds his gun. He has the shakiest gun in the West, just like the Don Knotts film title, which I've never seen, and I don't know if anyone has. But there is a Don Knotts sheriff Western comedy called The Shakiest Gun in the West.
Oh man, if only Paul Marco starred in that one.
Don Knotts was a talent. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I was being
as a comedic actor.
I was being sarcastic there.
Right.
Paul Marco was not as talented as Don Knotts.
I'm just saying. I think we can drop a joke where we can put Loretta King as Janet Lawton in Quatermass. I just don't think we need to diminish Don Knotts. That's all I'm saying.
I'll keep the Don Knotts slander for another time. I guess.
So back to the Strowski scene, because Strowski meets with Vornoff, and they know each other. Mm-hmm. They are colleagues or something from their home country, wherever that was, in Eastern Europe somewhere. Strowski, I assume, would be like a Polish name, because it's spelled with an I. I think if it's spelled with a Y, it would be like Ukrainian or Russian.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm not an expert on the Finno-Ugric languages. I can't get into this. Nor do I even know if Polish is a Finno-Ugric language.
Well, I don't want to give Ed Wood that much credit either, because I don't think he would know the difference between if something has an I or if it ends with a Y.
That's true. But
he was a very intuitive writer, like whatever came to him.
You've got a dude from the Balkans here. Lugosi probably knew.
That's true.
He's from Hungary. I almost said Hungary.
That is true. If he cared enough, he could have corrected.
I hate to say it, but Lugosi was probably just. I'd imagine Lugosi on the set is just. This is his heroin period. This is just not a pleasant set for him,
Yeah, pretty
I feel bad
much.
for the guy. But let's get to his best scene, the Strowski scene. So Strowski, whatever country Strowski's come from, their government shunned Vornoff and all of his atomic experiments. They're like, okay, this is stupid. Your science is bad. And then Lugosi goes in this monologue, which is actually. Again, not really performed that well, but there's something dramatic about it. I think it's even just when an actor gets to a certain age, there's just so much. Just looking at their face can tell a lot of stories. Yeah. It's listen, I'm not saying Cry Macho is a great movie or anything, but seeing that 98-year-old Clint Eastwood kind of, back in the saddle. There's just like something about that,
Yeah.
So it's just like his face there's just something about it. And then like he's just able to communicate so well, even when because he's doing kind of goofy faces in this scene, like really exaggerated, kind of like with his mouth and his eyes especially. And Lugosi was always about the eyes, going back to Dracula and those like creepy stares and everything. That was always his strength as an actor, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's good that Ed Wood doesn't cut to a close up here like he does in some of the other scenes.
Well, the close-ups are very specific. The close-ups on Lugosi are very specific. They are to be inserted in place of the stunt double, basically.
Yeah, pretty much, and they do not
so,
they
but
do
you're
not
right.
work.
No, absolutely. It doesn't look like he's on the same universe as that stunt double.
Exactly.
It's just like the lighting is. I mean, it's not even a film in color, and I somehow feel like the color temperature is off in that scene.
It's the old Mystery Science Theater guy. Is I'm in another dimension. Ah.
I think because I did see this episode again on Mystery Science Theater after I watched the movie, and I don't know if it's in that scene. I think it might be with the octopus. The first time we see the octopus, but Tom Servo's like, folks, try and connect these two shots here or something like that.
Exactly.
But yeah, this Lugosi speech is like kind of neat. He's talking about how he was taken away from his home country, he was taken away from his family, and it's like kind of neat. And it's like, wow, yeah. I know how Dante felt when he got kicked out of Florence. It's great.
I think it's the sadness that begins it. If it was just him being like the mad, because he ends on a mad scientist note saying like a race of people that will conquer the world.
Yes, exactly.
But so if it was just at that speed the entire time, then it wouldn't work. But instead, it begins with that really sad like home. I have no home.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So say what you will about the way he delivers the lines, but that one thing that he starts off the speech with, that is like that just nails it. I think that's what keeps it effective throughout, rather than just starting at 100 and just keeping it there.
I think that's fair. Yeah. It's like I said, he's like the stock mad scientist character, and yet you usually don't see the innate sadness in those characters, and in this one specifically we do. Does it really pay off later? Well, not really, but I mean it works in this scene at least.
Ed Wood's dialogue was just always goofy, and in this, if you read it on the paper, it is a little goofy, but I think it's the one time it almost it escapes the goofiness of an Ed Wood movie and gets some kind of like honesty. Like honest emotion. Because Glenn or Glenda, I would absolutely go to bat for that movie any day of the week. But it is still very strange and very goofy, and you can't really extract the two from each other. This is just like it is like real emotion in Bela Lugosi's face. As exaggerated as it is.
I would say even you mentioned the dialogue being goofy. I would say this is some of the least goofy dialogue we have. Some of the most is like just the back and forth kind of interactions, and it's almost like inconsequential interactions of just like two people talking where it's not really about the plot so much. Like that's the really goofy stuff. Or it's not in this movie, but like all of Criswell's dialogue is just like, what? Who wrote this?
Big time.
This is I don't know if I can say it's well written, but it's different. It's something different for sure.
Well, it's a little it's I guess cheesy is the wrong term. It's a little hard boiled. Like Ed Wood's style is
like
just
the John
always...
Woo film.
No, hard boiled might also be the wrong term for it, but stylized.
He just slips into Mandarin all of a sudden. I didn't see where that was going. Well, I guess it'd be Cantonese, excuse me.
This is a little stylized still. Not as much so as like a lot of the other dialogue here, but it is still like it's not like deeply emotional sentiment. It is like I'm not going to do Bella's emotion. I'm not going to do Bella's speech or his accent or anything. But here's the text as it reads on the page.
Oh,
home,
here we go.
Home. I have no home. Hunted, despised, living like an animal. The jungle is my home, but I will show the world that I can be its master. I will perfect my own race of people, a race of atomic supermen which will conquer the world. Like, it really is Bella that sells it, above all else. I guess is
Oh,
what I'm trying to
100%,
say,
yeah.
you know?
And it's Bella that makes it goofy at the end, too, because that's when the accent really, a Superman, you know, that's kind of where the accent, the goofiness of the accent shines through.
Yeah,
So
and
he sells it all the way, good and bad. You know?
And I think he has to know, like, sometimes that he's in on the joke, you know? Like, he knows that it's not Shakespeare necessarily, but he's treating it like, you know, like
Yeah,
the
he
intensity.
Yeah, he is, and in credit to, you always appreciate, you know, a former, I'll say A-lister. This is kind of an era where maybe there wasn't really, you know, what is an A-lister in the 30s, I don't know. But, like, he was a big name.
Yeah.
And here he is at the end of his career. He's in a terrible movie. He knows it's a terrible movie. He's been in, I actually don't think he has been in James Whale movies, but he's been in Todd Browning movies. He knows what a good movie looks like, what it feels like, what having a solid director is like on set. He knows what having significant funding for a film is like, probably.
Yeah.
And then he knows that this isn't that. Mm-hmm. But you got to give credit to an actor that commits to any. You can look at any other movie. Like Donald Pleasance is giving it his all in Halloween 5. And that's like, he's above that. I mean, Donald Pleasance isn't the star that Bela Lugosi is, but like, yeah, I just like, you know, John Carradine gave fully committed performances in some terrible movies, you know?
Yeah, that's the mark of
Bette Davis later in her career was making utter nonsense and still giving it her all.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the mark of a real star, is someone who just like does not give in to, like, you know, the cheapness of material, just someone who does whatever they can to make it work, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think like that's why no one talks about the last 20-30 years of Marlon Brando's career very much, is because he just did, when he's in The Freshman care. And he just did not care. And here's the old story that goes around about, he said, oh, well, you know, I test the director on their first day. I give them one take where I don't try at all, and I give them one take where I really try. And if they go for the take that I don't try and they think that's good enough, then I just don't try the entire film. And I'm like, you piece of shit.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you can imagine a director, especially the director who's younger than him, which is probably the case most of the time, is intimidated by Brando.
Of course.
You know, and then because he's Brando.
Yeah, and then he just uses that against them the entire production. So but that's why, like, you don't, like, he was in movies, but people just don't talk about them at all. But people still talk about.
Yeah, to a lot of people, Brando's career ends with Apocalypse Now, basically.
Yeah, and even then, he like was already starting to like fade a lot.
Well, yeah, but you at least had an egomaniacal director who fought back in that case, I think.
Yeah, thank God for that.
I guess, but
yeah. You had, but Bela Lugosi, John Carradine, Bette Davis, absolutely, but John Carradine, even
Betsy Palmer in Friday the 13th, she's given it her all for a movie that she thought was utter shit.
Absolutely, you know,
she just wanted a new car. That's the story.
It's just, I'm really happy that we have people like that, or actors with that level of dignity, you know? Because sometimes people will say, oh, well, you're in this shitty movie, you're in this schlock movie right now, you know, that's got to be a major hit to your dignity. No, if they're able to, like, really try and give it their all, I'd say that they succeeded beyond, like, if they didn't try at all.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. Although, I mean, some performances where, like, an actor isn't trying at all are really fun. But I mean, those are, I don't even want to say they're few and far between, but some of those are quite. But then again, I'll take a Bela Lugosi over a Bruce Willis any day. And you know, I have a feeling you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Pretty much.
Bruce Willis has not given a shit in decades.
Exactly. Even in movies like that,
movies that are like written for him, he's just like, I don't care. It's a paycheck.
Well, at this point, it's like almost any movie that you're going to have Bruce Willis in is written for him on some level, but he just does not care at all. Unfortunately, the talent of the Strowski-Lugosi scene does not last throughout the rest of the movie. Even
before the scene's done, it gets incredibly goofy, because this is our first Lobo sneaking up on people where he's just there. And he's just there. He's like, Strowski's standing up, Lobo's right behind him. He has no idea, and Lugosi just has another line or two, and then Strowski pulls out the gun, and then Lobo Lobo grabs him. It's like, oh man, that is that is bad. But we get another one of those scenes later, though. So stay tuned, folks. But yeah, so and here at this point, it's kind of like I don't really know what's happening. At some point, the two cops, Dick Craig, right, and that other guy who's I don't know if we ever get his name.
There's someone in the credits named Mac, but that could be one of the hunters in the beginning.
I did see that's probably Mac, but I don't know. They call the bird captain at some point, Captain Robbins.
Yeah. Like before you even said his name, you just said the bird captain.
Well, because that's his character. He's got a bird for no
defining
reason.
Trait. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. They call and say like, "Hey, we Strowski didn't come with us." Well, first of all, he's like, "And now you get back and don't let Strowski out of your sight." But they mention that Strowski was never there. So I don't know. Does he think they're going to find him again? I don't know. But I think they say something like, "Hey, we found Janet's car or something, and we're looking for her."
Yeah.
But I don't know where Mac goes, and we're calling him Mac. Whether or not that's Mac, I don't know. But eventually Dick Craig sneaks into the house. Or he doesn't sneak in. The door's just unlocked. He just goes in. But before that, we have, again, going back to, I guess Janet's hypnotized now. She's dressed up as a bride. Mm-hmm. She is on one of those operating tables. And then Lobo is too slow to hook her up, chain her up, whatever. So Bela Lugosi starts whipping him again.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think they feed Strowski to the octopus, but who cares?
Yeah, that was the one
The monster is the least interesting thing about this monster movie.
Well, the Strowski scene is the one where you can really tell that those octopus legs are not moving at all. That he really has to work hard if he's going to make it look believable, and it does not. Mm-hmm. And it's not even the octopus isn't even like in the first scene. At least the octopus is in like this tiny little pond. In this scene, it looks like the octopus is just in a closet. But that's the best way to describe it.
I don't disagree. So Janet is tied up, and then Lobo rebels against his master.
Yep.
And why? Well, I mean, why is he's being whipped? But so what does he do? Well, I guess first before he rebels, Dick Craig finds his way through the secret passage in the fireplace and shows up here. Lobo attacks him, and they end up tying him up or chaining him up. But again, that's another where like Lobo just shows up behind him, and he didn't notice this giant 700-pound man there. I don't know.
I mean, he's breathing with his mouth open the whole time too.
That's
so
true.
You had to at least heard that or something.
So this is when Lobo rebels against his master. So he frees Janet, right?
Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Then he fights Bela Lugosi's stunt double. At some point, he was chained up, but at some point, Craig is knocked out. Mm-hmm. And this entire scene, this entire Lobo versus Lugosi stunt double fight, the entire time Janet is just like hovering near the unconscious Dick Craig and just like she's just like watching the fight. There's no urgency to like get him up and get out of there, even as machinery in the lab is like starting on fire and exploding and stuff like that. They're just like sitting back watching the movie just like you or I, and it's great.
I love that moment.
Yeah, it's just it's so many cutaways too. It's not if it was just like one but yeah, it's like half the scene. It's just cutting back between those two things. But Lobo chains up Dr. Vornoff, and at this point, Vornoff with Janet she was going to be his original, like, I'm going to make this person a Superman, Superwoman, Supergirl.
I guess it's not like completely clear, but yeah.
Yeah, it's not that clear, but he says something like that. But then Lobo does this to Lobo, who we've been led to believe is just this brute who doesn't understand anything.
Yeah, like an ape
is able to figure out how to get the machinery work, and then works the experiment on Lugosi.
Lobo will create his own race of people.
Right, his Lobo's rice of Pipple, and then so they fight after that. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up. But they fight after that.
Honestly,
Lugosi's
everything
stunt
is a
double.
blur for me around this part of the movie.
At this point, yes. Once we get to stunt double territory, it's just like none of this matters. It's like what's going on.
Nothing matches
Although I will
up.
say
None of it matters.
Lugosi had 2 stunt doubles for this movie, or two not so much stunt doubles, they just stand-ins, whatever they'd call them. And one of them is the guy who was also his double for Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, back in October, Jim and I did a commentary track for that on our Patreon, and I was thinking, I'm like, some of these scenes has to be a stunt double, but at the same time, what a pain in the ass to make a stunt double. Like, if I'm making a movie and Bela Lugosi has to sit a couple hours in the makeup chair, I'm saying, hey, you're doing all your own stunts, because we're not taking the time to do this for a stunt double, right?
Oh,
but
I
apparently
completely
they had a
agree.
stunt double for that.
I completely agree, but at the same time, like, dear God, like, you're only paying the man $1,000.
Well,
How much?
Well, and
how
it
much
should be
can
noted,
you really get out of him?
And at this point, I mean, there's the stunt double. Once we get stunt double versus Lobo fight, the stunt double is a good foot taller than Bela Lugosi.
Oh yeah, big time.
At least I would say. But to be fair, this is after the Superman Rice of Pipple experiment has happened, so maybe it's made him taller. You know, I'm willing to accept that. But I'm just saying, like, it's a very obvious double. But it's a fun fight. He, like, breaks some glass over Tor Johnson's head. And Janet does not get away. Janet gets picked up by Lobo. Oh, no. Which one does she get? No, she gets picked up by Bela Lugosi, because Lobo probably dies in the fire. Apparently he comes back for the sequel, which I haven't seen, but you know, we're led to believe Lobo's dead.
It's a loose sequel, you know. They always say it's a sequel, but it's really just
It is Ed Wood, though, right?
Yeah, it's Ed Wood. It's just
Okay.
like the same characters, like a couple of characters appear, but it's not like they're saying, "Oh, this is just like that one time with Dr. Varnoff and all that stuff."
Okay, so it's the Hobgoblins 2 of the Ed Wood filmography, probably.
Assuming that
That's what I've been led to believe is what Hobgoblins 2 is. It's the same characters, but no real continuity.
I've avoided Hobgoblins 2 to this date. But one day
it only came out like a few years ago, right? I mean, yeah. No, don't get me wrong. I have not seen Hobgoblins 2. I've barely made it through Hobgoblins 1, although I've probably seen it like 5 times at this point. It's awful. Anyways, back to a movie that's actually better than Hobgoblins, and I'm not kidding.
That is true. That is better than Hobgoblins.
Bela Lugosi's stunt double picks up Janet, and they leave. Craig finds the other cops, which at this point includes Captain Robbins, who is without his bird, and it includes, what was that guy's name? The Barney Fife guy? Kelton, yeah. So Kelton's about to shoot Bela Lugosi as he's carrying Janet, and Craig is like, no, like, you idiot, he's carrying her. So they eventually, he, I guess, sets her down or maybe drops her or something. then everyone starts shooting at him. And these are the famous Bela Lugosi close-up cutaways, which are among the worst-looking shots I've ever seen in a motion picture. Well, because it's like Lugosi very clearly doesn't know what he's doing as an actor.
No.
Like they probably just said, make a face.
Yeah, like we're just gonna get this shot of you walking this way. And
but he's supposed to be reacting to like he's being shot, I think, but he's really just making like goofy faces.
Yeah, just say like be menacing or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that was the one direction. I'm willing to bet. be menacing, be scary. 95-year-old Bela Lugosi. Pull it off.
Be scary.
Listen,
and
you
we'll
were great
cut
in
around
White
it
Zombie,
to make
man.
it really, really impressive. And,
Right.
It does not work one bit.
It's just awful, and I mean that's why it's wonderful. And then the boulder goes after him.
Remember the boulder, the famous boulder from earlier in the movie?
Was this earlier in the movie?
No, it's not. It just shows up.
Well, why did you have to say? We're not even sure we're in the same location as earlier in the movie. I mean, this need to be set up.
But it's a boulder. Like
the boulder, the way it's just sitting there, it's like very clearly a prop. It's like, oh, I wonder if that's going to roll down the hill.
It's just like these things don't just show up out of nowhere. You just all of a sudden you have a boulder there. It's so. Yeah. It just adds to like just how confusing and baffling the last 10 minutes of this movie is.
Right. Well, and I do enjoy the close-up of Bela Lugosi as the boulder hits him, which obviously the boulder's not hitting him, but Bela Lugosi just kind of like leans back with like a terrified face on his expression, and that's the boulder running him over. And if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, but I want to say in the shot we get of like the boulder actually kind of hitting the actor, or maybe not quite hitting him, but the stunt double like moves forward and Lugosi moves back, so completely not matching shots.
I would need to check that out because at that point,
I could be mistaken, but yeah, nothing is matching. So I mean, maybe is it that much better if he doesn't do that? Probably not. But then, speaking of nothing matching or nothing making sense, Bela Lugosi's stunt double ends up in the cradle of the octopus. I guess somehow.
Somehow
the boulder pushed him there.
The boulder we all know and love,
which was not in the vicinity of this lake or pond or swamp, whatever it is.
Yeah, it just pushes into the pond that is connected to the stock footage. If someone could lay out the geography of this whole area here, that would be great.
Oh yeah, they say like the interior geography of like the Overlook Hotel is intentionally confusing. Listen, you have not seen an Ed Wood film. This feels like it has to be intentional, and it's not. It's just bad filmmaking, but that's what's fantastic about it.
Yeah.
But we haven't even gotten to the most confusing part of the scene, because there's an atomic bomb explosion. We got to stock footage of an atomic bomb testing.
Stuff that just happens.
That's supposed to be Lugosi and the monster blowing up, because again, there's some kind of loose atom bomb type thing with the experiments, and this monster again, which we've debated if it is it even a monster, it's just an animal.
Yeah.
It's been born out of his atomic experiments, but it blows up, and again, atomic bomb, big explosion, right? Well, characters 5 feet away are like, oh, that's weird, and they're just like looking at him. But we see the stock footage, and it's this giant mushroom cloud, and it's like, okay, shouldn't this entire area be devastated? It's so weird, and they cut back to it a few times. It's almost as if the bomb goes off more than once.
Yeah, really emphasizing it.
It's fantastic. It's wonderful, and then I've teased it already, but we get the best line of the movie. First of all, who delivers it? Is it Captain Robbins? I think it's Captain Robbins.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely too poetic for Dick Craig.
Oh yeah, or Declan or whatever that guy's name is too. What's that guy's name? Kelton. Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, no, Kelton. Kelton would have butchered this line, but again, in Ed Wood's attempt to have "it was beauty killed the beast," the ending line that kind of sums up the theme of the movie, sort of thing. Captain Robbins just looks there. He's with Dick Craig and Janet Reno or whatever her name is, and he says, "He tampered in God's domain."
With now, Captain Robbins has not been here at all.
Yeah, he doesn't even really know what's going on. He's like the audience.
Context in this, but he just speaks the truth right
Yeah,
there.
he doesn't know anything about the experiments. That's a good point. The only one who really does of the characters who are here is Janet. I guess Dick Craig did find a thing of some paperwork, and it was really just Bela Lugosi headshots, but maybe it's implied that he found some experiment stuff. Yeah. So maybe he knows a little bit, but you're right. Captain Robbins, of all the people here, he's the least qualified to make a summation like that. But regardless, though, the line itself...
To put a big button on this whole story,
He tampered in God's domain. What a line. It's like
a thing of beauty,
Does it tie to anything in the movie? I mean, a tiny bit. It has no business being spoken at this point in the film, but it's fantastic. What a line.
Yep. Honestly, talk about an epitaph one day. I think even though I would not rank this with my favorite Ed Wood movies, that's the kind of thing you could just.
That's what you write on Ed Wood's gravestone.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah, right on his tombstone. Edward D. Wood Jr. He tampered in God's domain.
Right. No, that's maybe what I put on David Carradine's headstone, given how he went. But yeah, no, it's what a line. What a line, what a film. I think I ended up enjoying talking about this a lot more than I thought I would, actually. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, really, this conversation is a lot more entertaining than Bride of the Monster itself.
All right. Well, I was about to ask you, what do you think of this film? But yes, I'm getting some
there's a few really boring stretches. in it.
Oh,
Like,
no doubt.
Like
No
you've
doubt.
gotta really be in for the long haul to make it through all 70 minutes of this on its own.
70 minutes. Can I just say how much I miss old movies?
It's
Just
so
like a B movie that's 70 minutes. Like, it's just, we're not waste. I mean, we are talking about how this movie does waste time, and it's probably it should be like a 55-minute movie. But if I'm completely not really engaged in the movie, like, make it 70 minutes, make it 80 minutes. I don't want to see an hour
exactly. And
minutes
I've got,
Pride of
and
the
then
Monster,
I just keep checking my watch, and I'm like, okay, well, we don't have that much longer.
Of all the actors I've seen in multiple films, I'll say like maybe a minimum of 5, Bela Lugosi has to have the shortest average length movie. Because all those Universal monster movies are 70 minutes. This
Probably.
is 68 minutes or whatever. Well, Son of Frankenstein's like an hour 40, and he is in that.
Yeah.
But so is Karloff, and Karloff, Targets is probably like an hour 40. I've seen some later Karloff movies, the Corman movies, and so it's like, okay, maybe those kind of bump up his average movie length. But yeah, Lugosi gotta be.
Literally the only people I can think, not that I've seen many of these movies, but literally the only other people I could think of would be like the freaking Bowery Boys, where
Those
like
kinds of things.
All those B movies for Poverty Road were like 50 minutes long. But anyways, yeah, Bride of the Monster, I would say not very good, not as enjoyable as like some of the most hilarious Ed Wood movies, but good Bela Lugosi performance overall, really enjoyable to watch at the very least when he's on screen.
His goofy faces, his great monologue, he's one of the more enjoyable parts for sure.
There are a lot of reasons to watch it, I would say, check it out.
I think that's fair.
I think it's not a good starting place for Ed Wood. If you want to know more about this crazy filmmaker, this is not him at his craziest or at his most entertaining, but it is...
Or at his lowest budget.
Yeah, that too. It's probably the highest budget he ever worked with.
At his most limited in terms of, I have one shot of Bela Lugosi, and I'm going to pretend Bela Lugosi's in this movie. So here's this guy covering his face with a cape. Like, there's nothing like that in this movie.
When you first read about Ed Wood, that's the kind of stuff you want to see. So you won't get much of that here.
Right.
But it does have a lot of parts that make it enjoyable. And I definitely put it on over, a lot of, modern movies, modern, action sci-fi movies any day of the week, just for sheer enjoyment and nostalgia factor.
Right, yeah, there's this enjoyment to be had here. I agree it's not the bad movie, the B movie masterpiece that Plan 9 or The Room or Samurai Cop or, insert bad movie here, Troll 2. Mm-hmm. It's not that. It's an entertaining bad movie. It's an entertaining B movie. You see little glimpses of the complete ineptitude of Ed Wood, but it's a lot of the B movie staples, like the shots not matching, the poor integration of stock footage. It's not the most entertaining thing to see in a bad movie, but when it happens as often and as blatantly as it does here, when it's the entire climax of the movie, it's still pretty fun.
Yeah, the climax of the movie is just, it's worth the price of admission alone just to be completely baffled by. And I think it is interesting that it's not as technically inept or strange as Ed Wood's other movies, and that almost makes it more boring. Because it almost the more it feels like a real movie, the more it feels like a normal movie, it starts to...
And again, I'm only comparing it to Plan 9, but it is definitely more of a normal, it feels more like a the 50s sci-fi monster movies you'd see. It's just a worse version of that. Plan 9 is kind of its own thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's its own beast completely. But Ed Wood is just in general, it's not filled with a bunch of this famous stuff you go to Ed Wood for, but it's...
The falling tombstones, all that stuff.
It's pretty fun. Pretty fun on its own level. Just fast forward through some of the, interminable cop scenes.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the dialogue is funnier and goofier than I remembered because it's been a while since I've seen an Ed Wood movie of any kind.
Yeah.
And again, really, I've only seen the 2. Well, maybe a couple other ones I don't really remember. But yeah, that's how I agree with you. It's good. It's you're right. It's not the best. If you want to know who Ed Wood as a filmmaker and if he was the worst filmmaker ever, which, I think for a long time that was just accepted as gospel. But,
it's not,
there's
not
so
even
many.
True. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Jesus Franco, I'd have to mention him. I think I've seen something he was referred to as like the European Ed Wood or something at one point. And I'm like, it's probably pretty accurate.
Yeah.
There's so many others. There's so many others I'm sure I'm not even aware of.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
No,
yeah, this isn't the best example of his distinct lack of talents, but it is a solid example.
Yeah, pretty much. And if you're in the mood for, sort of like a goofy old sci-fi movie, you could do a lot worse.
Oh, sure. Yeah, this is more entertaining than Robot Monster. Robot Monster is just walking around in the desert in a goofy gorilla suit. That's all that movie is.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that suit does go a long way.
That's true. That suit
it never stops being fascinating, the fact that you're watching
true.
A guy in a gorilla suit with a diving helmet on.
Best example. So, which of these two movies do you prefer? Like, which did you find more entertaining?
Well, I don't know if it was too obvious from the way I talked, but I definitely prefer Quatermass Xperiment.
Okay.
To the two of them, just as and I'm the kind of guy who wouldn't really separate good movies from quote unquote bad movies. If I get enjoyment out of it, that is definitely something that is a huge factor for me. No matter if that enjoyment might be unintentional on the original part of the filmmaker, but Bride of the Monster doesn't do it for me as much as a lot of other bad movies do. And Quatermass is just really solid storytelling all around. Yes. So I'm 100% behind Quatermass here.
I agree with you, and I kind of am one to distinguish between what I enjoy for it being good and what I enjoy for it being bad, with the exception of Sleepaway Camp, which breaks my brain because it's both simultaneously.
Yeah.
That having been said, like 9 times out of 10, a good bad movie, like a bad movie that I just really enjoy, versus a good movie that I enjoy, I'm usually going to take the good movie, especially unless the exception being if the bad movie is like one of the all-time great bad movies.
Yeah.
Or if, and even then it might take like me not to love the good movie. And in this case, I don't love Quatermass. I think it is a very good movie.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I got to go with Quatermass. For me, it's kind of close though, because Bride of the Monster, that last scene does a lot to kind of save it, to kind of redeem it, I should say. That last scene, the line alone, he tampered in God's domain. It's just like, you don't even know who this guy was. Why are you saying that?
I just get really bored in the middle. I think that's the main thing that drags it down for me. But the beginning and the ending are both great, And like I said, it has the great scene in the middle that's like legitimately not even so bad it's good. Just pretty good scene.
Yeah, it's bordering on a quality scene.
Exactly.
So, Kevin, how do you think this stacks up as a double feature?
Well, I actually did watch them back to back, and there are a couple
personal experience here.
Couple quality comparisons there between the two of them. You do have sort of like veiled social, not veiled. There really isn't much commentary at all in Quatermass, but I did.
No, there's shockingly more in Bride of the Monster. It's hackneyed though it may be, but
there is still a sense of like post World War life in general, and I think that they make an okay double feature, not completely complementary, but they both seem to function in sort of the same world. I can imagine a lot worse for a double feature.
Yeah, we got a similar monster, if nothing else, kind of.
That's true. Well, yeah, that's true. You got like a weird sort of blob creature with a lot of like really long arms, and then you got an actual octopus. That's just pretty much an octopus.
Yeah, I believe this is a very good double feature, and I'm going to focus really on one aspect. And I've heard people who aren't the biggest fans of like 50s sci-fi monster movies, and because a lot of those are very good, but I've heard people say, like, again, even what you said just now, like they're worse directors than Ed Wood. Yeah, there are, but I think like I've heard some people argue that like Ed Wood wasn't even that much worse than like your average 50s sci-fi monster horror movie, and it's like, and I think those people, when they say stuff like that, really do a disservice to something like Quatermass, which is a genuinely very good movie by today's standards. It's, so I think this is an interesting, like, you see the A movie and the B movie kind of, from, in this case, literally the same year.
Yeah.
Just certain similar, maybe not themes, but certain similar aspects to it. And you kind of see that handled in like a quality A movie, genuine classic form, and then also this kind of culty, schlocky kind of thing. I think that makes for an interesting viewing. So that's really where I stand on that.
I can definitely see the comparison between the two. Comparing it in terms of like the A movie and the B movie. It does feel like a double bill where like
because this is the era of the double bill thing. Yeah.
Exactly. So this would be like you pay for Quatermass Experiment, and then you get this weird other movie where there's an octopus as the monster.
And if you fall asleep during the middle, you're not missing anything.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as you wake up for that ending scene.
There's that Dracula guy who looks he looks familiar, right? I saw him in something before. Yeah, I can see it working that way.
All right. Well, Kevin, thank you for joining me. And,
of course.
Listeners, thank you for joining us. And here's what we've got up next week. We've got another 50s sci-fi classic in The Fly. And then we've got another all-out classic schlocky monster movie in King Kong vs. Godzilla. So stay tuned for that. Jim will be joining me as usual next week. And as always, we appreciate you wanting to hear what we have to say. And thanks again, Kevin.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Don't go tampering in God's domain on my watch.
I'll try my best. You know what I have to do now?
What's that?
I'm going to start again.
Oh yeah, I thought you were going to go there, but I forgot what the line was.
I forgot what the line was too. I
wanted to complete it for you. I wanted to complete it for you, but I genuinely forgot. That's why it's not a better line.